The Mandalorian has proven itself to not only be one of the best original offerings on Disney+, but one of the best new shows on television, period. Its conflicted protagonist is a member of a dying race, a warlike yet honorable people who once inhabited the planet Mandalore in the time of the Old Republic. During the time period in which the series is set, in between the original and sequel film trilogies, there are people whose numbers are dwindling fast due to a long history of conflict that has led them to being forsaken by their own government and exiled to the moon of Concordia, where they were left to die out. While the history of Mandalore is a bit fluid, one thing that has never changed is the race's distinctive armor. Armor which has been very familiar to fans ever since the first big screen appearance of the bounty hunter Boba Fett in Star Wars Episode V: The Empire Strikes Back. Before the release of The Mandalorian, it was even speculated by some fans that the title character might actually be Boba Fett, as that character's fate has been retconned since his seemingly fatal plunge into the Sarlacc pit in Star Wars Episode VI: Return of the Jedi. It turns out that Boba is still alive, meaning that he may very well be wandering the galaxy during the events of The Mandalorian, but the differences between the two characters are many and significant. All of these differences stem from the most obvious one: Boba Fett isn't actually Mandalorian. He's a clone of Jango Fett, who claimed to hail from Concord Dawn, a planet within the Mandalore system. Although Jango wore Mandalorian armor outfitted with the types of bells and whistles common to those worn by the warrior race, he had been disavowed by the Mandalorian government, which regarded him as nothing more than a scoundrel, a common mercenary whose only interest was in a paycheck. This goes to the core of the differences between Boba Fett, who followed in his father's footsteps in becoming the most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy, and the Mandalorian, whose identity is very strongly tied to his homeworld and its culture.
What caused this damage?
A mudhorn.
Then you have earned the mudhorn as your signet. I shall craft it.
While both Boba and the Mandalorian are seen operating as bounty hunters, and both operate mostly according to the codes of that profession, that and their armor is basically where the similarities end. This is because, like his father before him, Boba Fett's code of honor is largely his own, untethered to any larger philosophy, which stands in stark contrast to the Mandalorian, whose code isn't just a personal preference, but his actual religion. In the series' second episode, the titular Mandalorian states explicitly, "I'm a Mandalorian, weapons are part of my religion." So too is Beskar steel, the substance from which much of the Mandalorian's armor is forged and which is considered by members of his race to be a religious sacrament. Boba Fett, by contrast, has no such spiritual connection to Beskar, his weapons, or Mandalorian culture. His use of Mandalorian armor and tactics is largely an accident. His father had used his loose, if even existent, connection to Mandalore to bolster his own reputation. And indeed, his use of Mandalorian armor was quite effective in striking fear into the hearts of his quarry. According to Boba Fett's backstory, though, the bounty hunter essentially wore the armor because his father did. What a daddy's boy. One could certainly make the case that the Mandalorian's connection to his dying culture and the ways of the Mandalore make him a far more interesting character than Boba Fett ever was. They may both be a couple of bounty hunters in cool armor perpetually on the hunt for their next job, but the Mandalorian's reaction to the sticky situation in which he finds himself after taking custody of Baby Yoda is informed by more than his need for a payday. It's informed by the strong sense of honor which is typical of all Mandalorians. And it's even safe to say that if Boba Fett had found himself in the same situation, he might have decided to save himself a major hassle by simply terminating his green cuddly target and settling for the slightly smaller fee.
Bounty hunters. We don't need that scum.
The Mandalorian is a hit with all ages, but chances are that only the adults in the audience will notice these nods, references, and details. From references to classic works of foreign cinema to Star Wars trivia, here are the things only adults notice in The Mandalorian. Although it takes place in a galaxy far, far away, the Star Wars franchise can be viewed as a study of spaghetti westerns and samurai movies. George Lucas has openly acknowledged the direct influence films like Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress and Sergio Leone's The Man with No Name trilogy had on his space cowboy stories. Likewise, Mandalorian creator Jon Favreau has also cited the two genres and directors as major sources of inspiration for his show. He's even been quoted as saying Din Djarin is a deconstructed version of Clint Eastwood's iconic Leone character. Another major Mando inspiration is the film series Lone Wolf and Cub, sometimes known as Shogun Assassin in the US. This classic story follows a disgraced shogun's executioner forced onto the path of an assassin, who must take his young son with him. He pushes the little one around in a tricked-out baby cart. Sound familiar? Although The Mandalorian pulls heavily from the somber tones of spaghetti westerns and samurai films, it has plenty of laugh-out-loud moments too, particularly ones poking fun at the Star Wars franchise itself. These sarcastic memes are all too familiar to mature fans, who have been dismantling all the irregularities and quirks of their beloved franchise for years. One of the more memorable of these tongue-in-cheek scenes occurs in Chapter 12, The Siege, while Mando, Greef Karga, Cara Dune, and the unnamed Mithril are infiltrating an old Imperial base on Navarro. The crew encourages the Mithril to walk out on a precarious ledge over lava to access some machinery controls, to which he replies that there's no guardrail. A stark lack of safety railings on Empire ships is something Star Wars fans have been joking about since the first film was released in 1977, and was most notably mocked in the Star Wars parody episode of Family Guy, Blue Harvest.
So anyway, I says forget the dental plan, forget sick leave, I just want a railing. You know, one railing, right here.
Another hilarious moment of self-deprecation in The Mandalorian happens during the cold open of Chapter 8, which shows two stormtroopers missing repeatedly while firing at a piece of scrap within close range. The scene's playing on the age-old trope of the notoriously bad blaster aim. For a guy who never shows his face, Din Djarin is a huge chick magnet. Younger viewers may not notice, but mature audiences will pick up on the fact that, excluding Cara Dune, the few non-Mandalorian females he's crossed paths with have either been instantly attracted to him or had some sort of romantic history with him. In Chapter 4, The Sanctuary, Din crosses paths with a young widow named Omera, who seems to want the warrior to settle down with her. Bad boy Mando also seems to have broken the heart of Xi'an, a knife-throwing Twi'lek he works with in Chapter 6, The Prisoner. She threatens to use her blades against him for whatever shenanigans he pulled on her in the past. Adults will likely appreciate the sheer irony of seeing comedian Bill Burr cast in a Star Wars-related role. Longtime fans of his podcast know that the snarky Bostonian has long riffed on the franchise, as he never forged a personal connection with the original trilogy when it was released in his youth. Burr stirred up controversy within the Star Wars fandom for remarks he made in 2015, declaring that when he did finally watch the original trilogy in his mid-20s, he wasn't impressed.
I read a quote that you had, this is a while back, I think you called Star Wars a cheesy self-help book put in outer space with Muppets.
Put in outer space, yeah.
To be fair, Bill makes fun of everyone and everything equally, even his beloved sports team. Still, it may seem curious that Jon Favreau would cast a devout Star Wars hater in The Mandalorian. As it turns out, Burr claims Favreau chose him precisely for this reason, stating he thought it would be funny. Gina Carano's background makes her the ideal candidate for playing Cara Dune, the most recent addition to Star Wars' collection of fierce brunette heroines. Before she started acting, Carano was a Muay Thai fighter who launched her career as one of the first mainstream female mixed martial artists, competing back when the sport started blowing up in the 2000s. After earning an MMA record of 7 wins, 1 loss, and 0 draws, Carano transitioned into acting in 2008 with the role of Natasha Volkova in EA's real-time strategy video game Command & Conquer: Red Alert 3. Her ability to perform her own stunts and make action look realistic on screen has kept her busy with various action roles since. Yet another influence bound to be missed by younger viewers can be seen in Chapter 9, The Marshal, in which Mando travels to the frontier town of Mos Pelgo on Tatooine, seeking out other Mandalorians to aid him on his quest. Mando gets sidetracked helping the Marshal destroy a local sand-dwelling monster that has been plaguing his town, known as a greater Krayt Dragon. Krayt Dragons are initially mentioned in Star Wars: A New Hope, when Obi-Wan Kenobi scares off a group of sand people attacking Luke Skywalker by imitating its eerie howl. A Krayt Dragon's bleached skeleton can also be glimpsed poking out of the Tatooine sand behind C-3PO early in the film. However, this terrifying beast's appearance in The Mandalorian references the 1990 sci-fi horror cult classic Tremors. In that movie, giant worm-like creatures called graboids lurk underground, waiting to strike their next victim when they least expect it. While innocent young minds go no further than admiring Grogu's cool powers and cuteness factor, adult minds can't help but wonder where Grogu came from. If he's not a clone, as has been implied in the show thus far, then he was spontaneously created like Anakin Skywalker, or he was made the old-fashioned way. So far, the only other creatures encountered like Grogu in Star Wars have been Yoda and Yaddle. Could Grogu's existence explain the latter's sudden disappearance from the Jedi High Council? That all remains fan theory for now. But regardless of who sired the being formerly known as Baby Yoda, the twisted adult mind can't help but wonder how such creatures would accomplish procreation. Awkward it would be. Yes, a pleasant image it is not. Unless you know some kids with very strange and mature tastes, they likely missed a quick Mandalorian reference to the classic comedy Office Space. The film parodies all the negative aspects of toiling away at the dreaded 9-to-5 cube farm. From horrible bosses and wasting away in traffic, anyone who has ever worked a less than desirable job can relate to this movie. Office Space also makes fun of unnecessary corporate bureaucracy and paperwork, symbolized by the dreaded TPS reports in the film.
It's just we're putting new cover sheets on all the TPS reports before they go out now, so if you could go ahead and try to remember to do that from now on, that'd be great.
These reports seem to have made their way into the Star Wars universe, because Mayfeld mentions them in Chapter 15, The Believer. It's such a quick line and easy to miss.
Come on, let's go fill out those TPS reports so we can go recharge the power quill.
And you thought the Empire was evil before? Chapter 15 is loaded with Quentin Tarantino references. Mayfeld and Mando find themselves in a dangerous situation while posing as Empire personnel. An officer, Valen Hess, insists they join him for a drink. They risk exposing themselves while swapping small talk, but they can't break rank by refusing Hess's offer, so they agree. The suspenseful scene is reminiscent of the hair-raisingly intense bar scene in Inglourious Bastards. Both feature characters infiltrating enemy cultures while attempting to blend in as natives, and both situations soon explode into a violent catastrophe. Mando and Mayfeld's frolic at the Empire Bar might also remind an adult viewer of a scene from Django Unchained, when Dr. Schultz gives Calvin Candy a bullet rather than a requested handshake. Just like Schultz, Mayfeld is so overcome with loathing he can't help but pull the trigger, and thus puts his companion in grave danger. Also like Candy, Hess has a thick southern accent, and a sinister yet lackadaisical demeanor. A towering villain requires an actor of serious skill. Luckily, the Mandalorian's Valen Hess is played by a highly accomplished actor adults will likely recognize, Richard Brake. Brake succeeds in making his character absolutely hateful, but then, as grown-ups know, he has a lot of experience in that department. Brake started his acting career in 1993, with a small part as a reporter in a British comedy drama TV series, Jeeves and Wooster. Since then, Brake has performed in dozens of projects and at least 30 films spanning all genres. One of his more memorable roles to date has also been one of his most brief. He was cast as a Night King in the 4th and 5th seasons of Game of Thrones.
During the first season of The Mandalorian, Star Wars fans were shown the galaxy from a whole new perspective, with many of the show's characters providing answers to some of the franchise's oldest questions, and others posing brand new questions for fans to ponder. In Chapter 3, Star Wars fans got a lot more Mandalorian than they bargained for. After turning Baby Yoda over to the client, Mando earns a treasure trove of Beskar steel, which he brings to the mysterious armorer seen in the first episode. This draws the attention of other helmeted Mandalorians, and one of them isn't too happy with Mando acquiring the Beskar by working for remnants of the Empire. This scene reveals a little more about the Mandalorian culture while still raising a few questions about their creed. During the brief melee between Mando and his brethren, it's revealed that the Mandalorians follow a strict warrior code.
This is the way.
Take Mando's refusal to take Mudhorn as his signet, because his victory over the creature wasn't noble enough. Or the fact that other Mandalorians compromised their hideout to fight for Mando and his charge in spite of their earlier hostility towards him. These incidents speak volumes to the Mandalorians' complex, unyielding sense of honor. During Chapter 5 of The Mandalorian, the show's protagonist is forced to land on Tatooine after his ship is damaged in battle with another bounty hunter. The Razor Crest's landing awakens a small squad of slapstick droids whose design you may remember from The Phantom Menace, in which the same pit droids appeared in Watto's shop. While dormant, the droids almost look like metal turtles. But when Jar Jar Binks unintentionally brings one to life, the young Anakin lets him know that pressing their prominent noses puts them back into their dormant state. More of these comical droids appear in the pod race sequence, during which they act as clumsy, Three Stooges-esque mechanics for the racers. Mando insists the human mechanic, Peli, not allow any of her pit droids near the Razor Crest, and he's got a couple of good reasons why. Obviously, he doesn't want any of them finding Baby Yoda, and he's not exactly fond of droids in general. But Mando's also probably aware of how remarkably bad the droids tend to be at their jobs. In Episode 1's pod race, the droids do far more harm than good when their antics get one of their colleagues sucked into the pod engine of Odi Mandrul, scrapping the diminutive alien's chances at a win. Ming-Na Wen appears in Chapter 5 as the vicious Fennec Shand, an assassin who has been on the run ever since the New Republic imprisoned many of her old employers. It's not clear exactly who those employers are, but Mando guesses they could have included the Hutts. That seems likely considering she's hiding on Tatooine, which has historically found itself under Hutt control. But the very fact that Shand is on the run suggests that the Hutts may no longer be in charge, and that's kind of surprising, even considering the recent fall of the Empire. Sure, Jabba the Hutt died during the events of Return of the Jedi, but he was hardly the only Hutt. You would expect another would come in to fill the power vacuum left by the Crime Lord's death. The Hutts operated on Tatooine free from interference during the reign of the Old Republic, so why would that change with the new one? Of course, it's entirely possible that with Luke Skywalker's ties to Tatooine and his crucial role in defeating the Empire, the New Republic gave the desert planet a little more attention than the other Outer Rim worlds. After Mando and Baby Yoda finally blast away from Tatooine, the show introduces another character, or at least their feet. Not much is seen of the shadowy figure who approaches Fennec Shand's body, but it's a good guess that they're stalking Mando and Baby Yoda. And considering the prominent cape and the Tatooine setting, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that this is a cameo by someone fans have been hoping would show up in the series, Boba Fett. Now, Boba Fett supposedly died in Return of the Jedi when he was knocked into the Sarlacc pit, but in some versions of the now non-canon Legends universe, Boba Fett's armor helped him survive and eventually escape the Sarlacc. Many fans have been hoping the legendary bounty hunter would eventually show up in The Mandalorian, and it's possible this is who is seen examining Shan's corpse at the end of Chapter 5. Of course, it goes without saying that this isn't a definitive cameo by any means. After all, it isn't as if Mando and Boba Fett are the only Star Wars characters with capes, and any number of characters could be behind this sneaky appearance. The shadowy figure could easily be Giancarlo Esposito's mysterious caped Moff Gideon, for example, or someone in his employ. And let's not forget that Darth Maul has a tendency to show up when you least expect him. Really, it could be anyone, and even the show's first season finale doesn't offer up any answers to this question. But considering the secretive nature behind this character's identity and the planet they're first seen on, it's clear that the show's creative team at least wants the audience to think this could be Fett. The droid known as Zero is the Razor Crest's pilot during Chapter 6, but there's more to this sinister droid than meets the eye. For one, he's voiced by critically acclaimed director and actor Richard Ayoade, best known for playing Moss on the IT Crowd.
I came here to drink milk and kick ass. And I've just finished my milk.
But there's also the type of droid Zero is. It seems likely that Zero is an RA-7 droid, or something very much like it. These droids were largely used by the Empire as spies, and in spite of some of his shortcomings, Zero does come off as slightly more cunning than the rest of the crew. After all, he's the only one who thinks to examine the recording of Greef Karga's message in case there's something important about it, which obviously there is. It's also interesting that Zero's immediate reaction to Baby Yoda is to try to kill him. Not to capture him and sell him to the guild, but simply to kill him. This could easily be down to his former Imperial programming. As the type of droid that was used specifically on clandestine missions, he may know exactly what Baby Yoda is and what he's capable of. Credited only as New Republic soldier, the sole free human aboard the prison ship before Mando and his crew arrive doesn't seem particularly impressive at first. He's as green as Baby Yoda, but without the Force skills, and seems about as capable of pulling the trigger on Mando and his crew as he is of pulling off that helmet. So it might surprise you to find that this guy is actually Darth Vader. Well, kind of. Playing the New Republic soldier is Matt Lanter, an actor with a whole lot of voice work under his belt, including voicing none other than Anakin Skywalker on the animated series The Clone Wars. He voiced the would-be Sith Lord again in Star Wars Rebels and Star Wars Forces of Destiny, as well as in video games such as Star Wars Battlefront 2 and a number of the LEGO Star Wars games. The sister-brother duo of Xi'an and Quinn aren't exactly the most sympathetic characters in The Mandalorian. Xi'an comes off as the kind of killer who would just laugh as she tears her victims to pieces, while Quinn betrays just about everyone in Chapter 6, including the crew sent to break him out, and even his own sister. However, it does seem like the pair have good reasons to be turned cold and heartless. Xi'an and Quinn are Twi'leks, a race known for being targets for galactic slave traders. Female Twi'leks in particular are sought out because they're considered physically attractive to many different races, and you might remember seeing female Twi'lek slaves in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi or in Mos Espa in The Phantom Menace. Xi'an hints that she and Mando have been intimate in the past and even implies she might have seen him without his helmet, but she doesn't seem like a particularly reliable source either. While Quinn is seemingly dead by the end of Chapter 6, Xi'an is still alive on the prison ship, and it could be that more about her and Mando's past is revealed at some point later in the series. By the time Mando returns to the space station after springing Quinn from the New Republic prison ship, he knows he's got nothing but more betrayal waiting for him. He takes the tracker that was triggered by the prison guard before his death and plants it on Quinn. Once Mando leaves the station, Ran orders a pilot to kill him, but the waiting gunship never gets a chance. Quinn discovers the tracker, and moments later, 3 X-Wing fighters appear and open fire on the hostile vessel. But the 3 pilots who attack the space station are all used to working on the other side of the camera. They are Rick Famuyiwa, Dave Filoni, and Deborah Chow. All 3 have directed episodes of The Mandalorian, with Famuyiwa directing this very episode. Meanwhile, both Filoni and Famuyiwa have writer and producer credits on the series. Filoni has been with the Star Wars universe for a while. In fact, he oversees Lucasfilm's entire animation division. Before The Mandalorian, he worked as a developer and supervising director of The Clone Wars, Star Wars Resistance, and Star Wars Rebels. When Mando returns to the planet where he first meets Cara Dune, the Rebel veteran is having a ball brawling a spiky-headed opponent. Cara's opponent is a Dothamirian Zabrak, a species whose most famous member is Darth Maul. The resilient Sith Lord killed Qui-Gon Jinn way back in The Phantom Menace and was seemingly cut in half by Obi-Wan Kenobi, but miraculously survived and showed up in both The Clone Wars and at the end of Solo: A Star Wars Story. Because Sith Lords are super tough to kill, right, Palpatine? Too soon? Feels too soon. Anyway, this Zabrak's name isn't revealed, but in spite of Cara Dune getting the best of him, he must be a resilient sword as well. The Sith wiped out much of their race during the Clone Wars in retaliation for an assassination attempt on Count Dooku. Whether this Zabrak or his parents were lucky and happened to be off-world, or if they managed to escape the Sith's punishment by other means, he's likely one of the last of his people. It may be a running joke that stormtroopers aren't very good at hitting their targets, but the kernels of truth that make those jokes funny don't apply to the Death Troopers. In Chapter 7 of The Mandalorian, the troopers in black armor who show up outside the client's compound are Death Troopers, elite Imperial soldiers specializing in stealth and trained to achieve maximum body counts. One of their main tasks was guarding high-ranking members of the Empire, so the fact that a squad of these deadly warriors precedes Moff Gideon's arrival on Navarro speaks to just how influential Gideon is. If the Death Troopers look familiar, they should. The Death Troopers kept Orson Krennic company through most of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. They can be seen in the spin-off's opening sequence when Krennic finds the Urso family in hiding, and they're with him on Scarif when the heroes arrive to get the Death Star plans. The deployment of the Death Troopers to the battlefield is one of the moments that turns the tide against the Rebels' surprise attack on the facility. In Chapter 7, the Mandalorian's main antagonist makes his first appearance, Moff Gideon. And Gideon gets some more to do in the show's finale, including making a stunning reveal that calls back to Star Wars animated shows. Some interesting details about Gideon become clear in Chapter 8. First, Moff Gideon is apparently presumed dead by much of the galaxy. When Mando tells his allies who is waiting for them outside the compound, Cara says it's impossible because Moff Gideon was executed for war crimes. Second, it seems that Gideon had a position of power on Mandalore. After Gideon reveals that he knows Mando's birth name, Mando tells his allies the only record of that name was in the registers of Mandalore, and that Gideon was an officer with the Imperial Security Bureau during the Mandalorian Purge. But the biggest reveal comes after Gideon's TIE fighter crashes on Navarro. Gideon cuts himself free from the crash with the Darksaber, a black lightsaber that first appeared in the Clone Wars animated series. The Darksaber was originally held by Tar Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi. The weapon changed hands a number of times and was last seen in the possession of Sabine Wren and Bo-Katan in Star Wars Rebels. It's not yet clear how Gideon got his hands on the Darksaber, but considering the man in question, it's fair to say he probably didn't get it by asking politely. Even at the end of The Mandalorian's first season, not much is known about Greef Karga's past. Obviously, he's a man of high rank in the Bounty Hunters Guild. From his dealings with Mando, it appears Greef is a cunning, intelligent bounty hunter who will happily stab his allies in the back if it suits his needs. He does show a spark of honor in Chapter 7, however, when he saves the child and his protectors in return for Baby Yoda saving Greef's life earlier in the episode. Season 1's finale does offer up one big hint about Karga's past, though. When Moff Gideon and his Imperial forces have the heroes cornered, he reveals that he knows very specific information about them all. Along with what he tells us about Mando and Cara, Gideon refers to Greef Karga as a disgraced magistrate. Greef being a disgraced magistrate suggests that, unlike his allies, this bounty hunter once walked a much different path. It's not clear what exactly Greef did to earn his dishonor, though he is seen reaching for a bottle of liquor in his most desperate hour. It's entirely possible that Greef has a soft spot for a vice or two.
Never once touched my per diem. I go to craft service, get some raw veggies, bacon, cup of soup. Baby, I had a stew going.
Chapter 8 opens the pair of scout troopers who killed, Queel, and kidnapped the child in the previous episode. Waiting outside the town in which Gideon has surrounded Mando, the troopers wait around for orders, and a comical scene unfolds with the troopers arguing about the child and trying and failing to shoot at a piece of rubble.
A pet? Serves you right.
Although their helmets hide their faces, the show's credits reveal that the troopers are played by two actors more familiar with the little comedy. One of the troopers is played by former Saturday Night Live writer and cast member Jason Sudeikis, more recently known as one of the stars of the 2017 science fiction black comedy Colossal. The other scout trooper is played by Adam Pally, who Marvel fans might know as Gary the cameraman from 2013's Iron Man 3, the Tony Stark superfan who helps his idol with his news van's hardware. At first, there didn't seem to be much to say about the enigmatic Mandalorian armorer who works with Mando's Beskar in the show's early episodes. Chapter 8, however, gives a little more insight into the armorer's past. First, it's clear that the armorer is more than just a woman who fashions armor and weapons. She's a person of authority within the Mandalorian culture. The first hints of this appear in Chapter 3 when she stops the impending brawl between Mando and his brethren. In Chapter 8, when the armorer tells Mando he must discover the child's unknown species and reunite them, her word on the matter seems final. This would suggest her standing in relation to Mando has an almost religious weight to it, like a priest sending a knight on a holy quest. Second, it's shown that the armorer is as much of a warrior as she is an armorer. When she rebuffs Mando's insistence that she come with him and his allies, it seems like she's content to die fighting like so many of her fellow Mandalorians. But that isn't what happens. With nothing more than the tools of her trade, the armorer takes out an entire squad of fully armed stormtroopers armed with blasters. Don't be surprised if this particular character shows up again somewhere down the road.
The Mandalorian has the production values and watchability of a Star Wars feature film, as well as lots of subtle references and callbacks to other Star Wars media. Here are some Easter eggs that even the sharpest-eyed Star Wars fans might have missed in The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian takes place after the events of the original Star Wars trilogy and before the events of the sequel trilogy. There are a lot of different races from a lot of different planets interacting in the first episode, and many of them use their own distinct language. In a bar scene at the top of the first episode, a fearsome-looking man with an unruly beard beats up on a blue-skinned alien, the target our protagonist bounty hunter is after. "Look at his glands. I bet we could sell them at the port." Subtitles tell the audience what the bully says in an alien language. The guy tries to pick a fight with Mando when he arrives, asking if his armor is real Beskar steel. The language he's speaking is Huttese, the language of the Hutts, a Star Wars race made most famous by Jabba the Hutt in Return of the Jedi. After the Mandalorian captures and carts off his captured target to collect the price on his head in Episode 1, the prisoner makes small talk with the stoic, silent bounty hunter back on his ship. He even notes that he was hoping to be free for Life Day. Then he stops talking when he discovers Mando's other bounties frozen in carbonite, just like Han Solo in The Empire Strikes Back. What's Life Day? It's the Star Wars universe's equivalent of Christmas, a time for celebrating and relaxing with loved ones. It was first introduced in the Star Wars Holiday Special, an infamous 1978 television variety show. It follows Chewbacca's family as they watch futuristic TV and wait for him to arrive for Life Day. The special ends with Princess Leia singing a Life Day carol. Life Day isn't the only Mandalorian callback to the Star Wars Holiday Special. We also see the title character sporting a distinctive weapon that should be familiar to longtime fans of a galaxy far, far away. The pronged rifle he wields at one point during the show. It's a cool-looking apparatus with a long past. In Boba Fett's first ever appearance, made during an animated sequence during the Holiday Special, he's packing the same weapon. It likely doesn't mean much as far as a connection to Fett is concerned, but it's a nifty nod to Star Wars lore. Episode 2 delivers even more vaguely familiar entries in the Mandalorian's arsenal. During his battle with the Mudhorn, he fires a small flamethrower mounted on his arm. That's apparently standard issue bounty hunter gear, as both Jango Fett and Boba Fett have been depicted with one in various Star Wars media. The first episode of The Mandalorian is filled with enough alien dudes and monsters to satisfy any enthusiast. While it would take too long to list every single alien who appears in the show, it's certainly worth pointing out one of the most surprising appearances of the episode. Early on, when the Mandalorian and his bounty are booking passage back to his ship, the Razor Crest, they encounter an alien hidden behind a pair of goggles and a long snout. He plays a killer flute, and we never learn his name. But he should be recognizable to any detail-oriented Star Wars fan. This fellow was a Kubaz, an alien species who's only shown up one other time over the course of the Star Wars saga. Think back to A New Hope, specifically the scene shortly after Luke and Obi-Wan meet Han Solo and Chewbacca. In the alleyways of Mos Eisley, a Kubaz named Garandin contacts the Imperial stormtroopers patrolling the streets to let them know that he's found the droids they're looking for. If it's a Star Wars property, you can be guaranteed that it's going to be swimming in robots, or as they're referred to in the franchise, droids. The Mandalorian is full of blooping droids in the foreground and background, doing their jobs and staying out of the way of the humanoid characters. Well, mostly.
Oh no. Bounty droid.
In one scene in the first episode, the Mandalorian walks through a marketplace. One of the objects he walks by is some kind of red and white R5 droid. It looks an awful lot like the red and white R5-D4 model from Star Wars A New Hope, the one with the explosively bad motivator. Another R5 model appears later during Chapter 5 in the Mos Eisley Cantina. When the Mandalorian arrives at the fortified headquarters of the client, he's greeted by a round, red light-equipped droid tasked with security and gatekeeping. That looks and sounds just like the security droid Jabba the Hutt used in Return of the Jedi at the front gate of his palace. Until now, the Kowakian monkey lizard has had just one place in live-action Star Wars canon, as the snickering pet of unsavory characters like Jabba the Hutt. They're mischievous, they're obnoxious, they seem well suited for villainy, and they're apparently delicious. Immediately after the Mandalorian gets his bounty assignment from the client, he walks through the marketplace of a desolate-looking little town. One alien species stands out, the Kowakian monkey lizard. It's rough for him, too, because he's being spit-roasted while his buddy looks on horrified from a cage. It's a bit of a horrific sight, especially knowing that these animals are known to have a pretty well-developed sense of humor. While everyone's favorite monkey lizard, Salacious B. Crumb, escaped Jabba's insatiable hunger by having a special talent for being a goofball, these other creatures weren't so lucky. In Episode 2 of The Mandalorian, the one they call Mando is keeping the assets safe throughout a treacherous and violent journey. This trip includes a run-in with the Jawas, a race very recognizable to fans of Star Wars films for their hooded cloaks and glowing eyes. The Mandalorian blasts any that could get in its path, turning them into nothingness as they poof away without a trace. Later on, Queel tells the Mandalorian that the creatures really don't seem to like him for some reason. Mando replies,
Well, I did disintegrate a few of them.
This calls back to a brief exchange in The Empire Strikes Back between Darth Vader and Boba Fett, when Vader tells the bounty hunter to bring back the crew of the Millennium Falcon. Vader demands that Fett bring his quarry back with no disintegrations. During the evacuation of Cloud City on Bespin in The Empire Strikes Back, a random guy runs into the frame, looking for a way out while desperately clutching something about the size and shape of an ice cream maker. Nearly 40 years after the release of Empire, the third episode of The Mandalorian provides a full and compelling explanation for the frozen treat machine. The Mandalorian returns to the client to hand over the asset and to receive his promised reward, a Camtono of the precious metal Beskar. True to his word, the client hands over the Beskar in what looks like an ice cream maker. The Mandalorian is a working man before he's anything else. And while he's in possession of a tiny, adorable, Yoda-like creature for the first 2 episodes, he's also obligated to turn it over to the Imperials who hired him. But Mando isn't a monster, and he just can't bear to part with Baby Yoda after having bonded with and developed an affection for the little one. So Mando attempts to retrieve the baby, and as he looks for him, he spots a piece of metal pipe propped up against a wall in an alley. Is that just a random piece of space junk from this post-war galaxy? Not exactly. It's covered in ridges and designs recognizable from a very important piece of random junk in the original 1977 Star Wars. It looks just like the pipe that Princess Leia, Han Solo, and Luke Skywalker used to try to jam the walls of a trash compactor they got caught in. While the Mandalorian boasts some star power, the true breakout character is the one colloquially referred to as Baby Yoda. Just like Mando himself, the little guy has won over our hearts, and his adventures alongside his bounty hunter babysitter take up much of the show's plot. As far as we know, this adorable little creature hasn't been given a proper name yet. The online community just uses Baby Yoda because it looks and acts like a baby version of Yoda. In the 4th episode of the show, though, Mando does provide the child with a nickname, Womp Rat. It's a playfully delivered pet name, and one that has significance in the Star Wars universe. In Star Wars A New Hope, Luke Skywalker brags that back on his planet of Tatooine, he liked,
"I used to bullseye Womp Rats in my T-16 back home. They're not much bigger than T-meters."
While some fans may argue on behalf of the Enterprise, the Millennium Falcon is probably the most famous spaceship in all of pop culture. As piloted by Han Solo in the original Star Wars trilogy, its agility and firepower helped the Rebels topple the evil Empire. And yet, it's an old craft, long in the possession of Lando Calrissian before Han ever had it, and it certainly endured some damage in numerous conflicts with Imperial squadrons, including Darth Vader himself. Speaking of conflicts with the Empire, here's the AT-ST Scoutwalker, which attempted to lay waste to Endor in Return of the Jedi. In that movie, Lando refers to the Falcon as a hunk of junk. When the AT-ST makes its triumphant appearance in Episode 5 of The Mandalorian, Mando takes a page from Lando's book and calls the battered Scoutwalker a hunk of junk as well. There's one other fun link between The Mandalorian and Lando Calrissian. The 4th episode of the Disney Plus Star Wars series was directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, daughter of Ron Howard. Ron Howard was the director of Solo, a Star Wars story, which features young Lando as a major character. Like many planets in the Star Wars universe, Tatooine has a large and varied population of droids. Upon landing at the planet's Mos Eisley spaceport early in The Mandalorian's 5th episode, Mando is greeted by a couple of clumsy pit droids, much like the ones glimpsed in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. In charge of those pit droids is a spaceship mechanic overseeing the landing bay, portrayed by comedian Amy Sedaris under a lot of makeup and a curly wig. When Mando heads into the spaceport's watering hole to look for work, he finds more droids. This is notable because the establishment once banned mechanical patrons, as Luke Skywalker learned when he tried to enter with C-3PO. Now, years later, droids seem to be fully welcome there, mingling with the bar's expected variety of alien races. Even the hardworking bartender is a droid, and one of the same model that Jabba the Hutt used to oversee his robotic staff back in Return of the Jedi. An episode of The Mandalorian involving Mos Eisley would be remiss if it didn't include a sequence set in the spaceport's famous cantina, and Chapter 5 delivers. Inside the place that Obi-Wan Kenobi once called a wretched hive of scum and villainy, Mando chats with a young novice bounty hunter named Toro Calican. The cocky, aloof young buck definitely gives off a Han Solo vibe, but maybe that's just because he's sitting alone in a booth in the cantina with his feet up on the table. Toro isn't hanging out in the same booth that Han did, but it's very similar and just a few feet away from the site of one of the most famous scenes in Star Wars lore. Mando finds some action on Tatooine, and he and his new associate Toro Calican pursue the fearsome assassin Fennec Shand. We see them zooming off across the planet's desert surface on a couple of speeder bikes. Anakin Skywalker is seen riding a similar model in Attack of the Clones, just before he kills the group of Tusken Raiders that kidnapped his mother. Mando also encounters some of these sand people, approaching with caution to ask for permission to pass through their land. They get to go ahead and find Shand, armed with a monster of a rifle.
She's got the high ground. She'll wait for us to make the first move.
Mando tells Toro. That is a subtle, winking nod to a similar thing that Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Anakin Skywalker during their big lightsaber showdown in Revenge of the Sith, when Kenobi claims he has the high ground. Eventually, the two bounty hunters get the upper hand and manage to capture Shand. They decide to keep her alive because, as Mando says,
she's no good to us dead.
The phrasing reminds us of something Mando's fellow masked bounty hunter Boba Fett says to Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back. When Vader decides to put Solo in carbonite, the bounty hunter reminds the Dark Lord that Solo is no good to me dead. The Mandalorian has welcomed a number of comedians to its cast and supporting roles, and Bill Burr arrives in Chapter 6, The Prisoner. The Motormouth stand-up is a perfect fit for the role of Mayfield, part of the crack mercenary team hired by Mando's former cohort, Ranzar Ran Malk, to bust one of his pals out of a prison ship. On the way to that gig, Mayfield and fellow merc Xian address the elephant in the room. What exactly Mando looks like under that helmet? Mayfield, imbued with Burr's comic spirit, jokes that Mando must wear a helmet to hide the fact that he's a Gungan. It's a crude reference to arguably one of the most loathed characters in all of Star Wars, Jar Jar Binks, the goofy Gungan who played such a major role in The Phantom Menace. The 6th episode of The Mandalorian is particularly full of appearances by notable contributors to past Star Wars media. One of the members of the Prison Break supergroup Ran assembles is a Deveronian named Berg. Under all that makeup is Clancy Brown, a character actor with more than 250 acting credits, not the least of which is voicing Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob SquarePants. He's also done quite a few Star Wars voices, including Darth Maul's brother, Savage Opress on The Clone Wars, and Rebel leader Ryder Azandi on Star Wars Rebels. Another veteran of the Clone Wars animated series also pops up in Episode 6. That doomed New Republic trooper on the prison ship is played by Matt Lanter, the voice of animated Anakin Skywalker. Lanter has voiced the man who would be Darth Vader in more than 100 television episodes, which means he's played the part more than any other actor. The Mandalorian is full of nods to Star Wars past, whether they're tributes to the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, or beyond. In Chapter 6, though, the show also makes time to pay tribute to the people who made The Mandalorian itself. When the mercenary crew arrives on the prison ship for the task at hand, they walk past a cell that contains a 4-armed monkey-like creature that belongs to the Ardenian race. That species is a relatively new addition to the Star Wars canon. The alien first appeared in Solo: A Star Wars Story in 2018 in the form of Agile pilot Rio Durant. Rio was voiced by Jon Favreau, the creator and executive producer of The Mandalorian. Those X-Wing fighters who make an explosive appearance at the end of the episode are named Jib Dodger, Sash Kettler, and Trapper Wolf. They're portrayed by Rick Famuyiwa, Deborah Chow, and Dave Filoni, all of them directors of various episodes of The Mandalorian. The opening of The Mandalorian's first season finale offers a bit of much-needed comic relief to cut the high-stakes tension set up by the last episode. It also offers a bit of a callback to a joke from a previous episode about a beloved part of Star Wars lore. Remember in Chapter 6, when the mercenary Mayfield took offense at being compared to a stormtrooper? It's because stormtroopers are notoriously terrible shots. The 2 speedier bike-riding scout troopers shown in Episode 8 of The Mandalorian can't hit anything either, even when firing their blasters in a low-stakes, no-stress situation. They're firing at a piece of debris just because they're bored and they still can't hit a thing. In the 8th and final episode of The Mandalorian's first season, viewers finally get an information dump of background info on the mysterious and compelling ex-Rebel fighter Cara Dune. One major little nugget, as revealed by Moff Gideon, is that the former Rebel shock trooper hails from the planet Alderaan, the home planet of Princess Leia. Or at least, it was the home of Princess Leia until it was destroyed by the Death Star back in Star Wars: A New Hope. Craving justice for her people would have been a pretty motivating factor for Cara Dune, who then decided to become an active member of the rebellion. Because of her rebel history, Cara also mentions her fear of getting interrogated with a mind flayer. That's more of a horror fantasy term, like something out of Stranger Things. But in the Star Wars universe, Cara is most likely referring to something like the Borgullet. That's the purple-skinned, psychic creature that painfully interrogated Bodhi Rook in Rogue One. It's basically an alien lie detector, while also breaking someone's brain as it works. In a major moment of The Mandalorian Chapter 8, Moff Gideon cuts a path to freedom out of his downed TIE fighter with the use of a lightsaber. But this is not just any lightsaber, it's a black lightsaber. As it isn't cast in a customary neon shade, this is a very cool-looking Star Wars weapon, and also an instant indication that Moff Gideon is truly a dark force to be feared. His dark saber is, well, the dark saber, the ceremonial weapon traditionally bestowed on the leader of Mandalore. First forged by an ancient Mandalorian Jedi, it's popped up throughout the Star Wars animated canon. It was last seen on Star Wars Rebels, when Rebel fighter Sabine Wren passed it along to Death Watch leader Bo-Katan to more effectively fight the Empire. The fact that Moff Gideon now has this coveted weapon is bad news all around, as he's an Imperial diehard. That means a good guy, or perhaps a lot of good guys, had to die for Gideon to get his hands on it. This all poses a lot of questions which can only be answered by another season of The Mandalorian.
Set 3 years after the return of the Jedi, the Disney Plus Star Wars series The Mandalorian follows a lone gunslinger who works outside of the law. The cast features actors from the world of Game of Thrones, the X-Men universe, and even the Rocky movies. Here's how you might know them. From the moment that Pedro Pascal's Prince Oberyn Martell strutted into King's Landing, Game of Thrones gained a new fan-favorite character.
You shouldn't drink before a fight.
You learned this during your years in the fighting pits. I always drink before a fight.
As the Red Viper, Pascal was able to leave an extremely memorable mark on the series, especially with his grisly death. Pascal has also had a slew of minor roles in television, including playing Nathan Laundrie in The Good Wife. He also played Javier Peña in the Netflix original series Narcos. As for noteworthy movies, Pascal appeared in the action flick Kingsman: The Golden Circle and the drama If Beale Street Could Talk. At 2019's Star Wars Celebration in Chicago, Pascal briefly touched on his upcoming role in The Mandalorian, in which he plays the protagonist, saying, "The Mandalorian is a mysterious lone gunman in the outer reaches of the galaxy. Some might say that he has questionable moral character, which is in line with some of our best westerns, some good samurai films, and he's a badass." In this day and age, it's not uncommon for famous MMA fighters to make the transition to acting. Add Gina Carano to the list. Carano's first leading role came in 2011 when she played Mallory Kane in the adrenaline-pumping action movie Haywire. Since then, she has played minor parts in a couple of blockbuster smashes, including 2013's Fast and Furious 6 and 2016's Deadpool. In The Mandalorian, Carano will be playing Cara Dune, an ex-rebel shock trooper who is apparently having some trouble reintegrating into society after the last big Star Wars. Although not much is known of her character, Carano took to Instagram and shared the first image of her character, commenting about her time at Star Wars Celebration. She wrote, "I can't describe the energy I felt. It was incredible, and I'm so grateful for all of you and the crazy awesome support you showed us. I'm so stoked. That was epic." Carl Weathers is a Hollywood icon with a well-rounded acting resume of notable roles, including Apollo Creed in the Rocky franchise and Dylan in Predator. In the 90s, he embodied the hilarious golf legend-turned-coach Chubbs Peterson in Adam Sandler's timeless comedy Happy Gilmore. In The Mandalorian, Weathers will be playing the role of Greef Karga. Although the details of his character are still under wraps, the actor took the podium at this year's Star Wars Celebration in Chicago to offer some insight into his role, saying, "He's kind of the head of this guild of bounty hunters. There seems to be a lot of kind of nefarious people. He's looking for someone to go after a product for a client that's very valuable." A native of Copenhagen, Denmark, Giancarlo Esposito has played major parts in huge television series and lent his trademark silky smooth voice and charisma to several successful motion pictures. He is perhaps most recognized for his role as Gustavo Fring, the drug kingpin employer of Walter White in AMC's Breaking Bad. Like most facets of The Mandalorian, Esposito's role is still largely unknown. However, in an interview with Collider, the Emmy-nominated actor briefly opened up about his time on set, saying, "I got a great costume, we got great set pieces. I'm not giving anything away because Jon Favreau is an artist, truly an artist. He was working with George Lucas on this particular piece and making it a piece that we can really relate to now in our world that we're in." Can you imagine anyone but Harrison Ford playing the iconic role of Han Solo in 1977's A New Hope? Several high-profile actors were considered for the part before Ford, at the time a relative unknown, landed it. One of those actors was Nick Nolte, the star of 1977's The Deep. In an interview with MTV, Nolte admitted that he felt he would have been, quote, "kind of a goofy Star Wars guy." Now, as it turns out, he will get to be a goofy Star Wars guy in The Mandalorian, though the nature of his role is still unclear. Nolte has built up quite a respectable acting resume over the years, as proven by his 3 Oscar nominations. He is perhaps most recognized for his role as Jack Cates in 1982's 48 Hours and its 1990 sequel, Another 48 Hours.
You're done. End of story.
Although he is now well into the back nine of his career, Nolte is hardly slowing down, appearing over the past decade in projects like 2015's A Walk in the Woods and 2018's The Padre. Fans of the CW Supernatural will no doubt recognize Emily Swallow, who played the seductive Archangel-slaying Amara, aka the Darkness. The 39-year-old actress has also held a number of minor roles in various television shows, including The Mentalist and How to Get Away with Murder. Her big screen debut came in 2008's The Lucky Ones, briefly sharing the screen with Rachel McAdams and Tim Robbins. Although details of her character in The Mandalorian remain shrouded in mystery, Swallow's Twitter feed suggests that she had a great time on set, particularly while working with a special co-star. She wrote, "Working with Taika Waititi on one of my episodes of The Mandalorian fulfilled a very weird and off-kilter dream of mine." After directing the wildly successful Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi has become a household name for fans of comic book movies. In addition to lending his voice to the hilariously dry Cronin warrior Korg, Waititi also made a splash in the acting world with his role in the 2014 vampire comedy What We Do in the Shadows, which he also co-directed and produced. As it turns out, Waititi, who will also be directing an episode of the series, will be voicing the droid IG-11 in The Mandalorian. Star Wars fans will recognize this droid as being a similar build to IG-88, an assassin droid who was among the group of bounty hunters hired by Darth Vader to hunt down Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon in The Empire Strikes Back. German filmmaker Werner Herzog is perhaps best known for his directorial work overseas, including existential dramas about the human will like 1982's Fitzcarraldo. However, he has also tried his hand at acting more than a few times, like when he appeared alongside Tom Cruise in Jack Reacher. Eagle-eyed fans of NBC's Parks and Recreation might also recognize him from his cameo as spooky homeowner Keg Jeggins in an episode from the show's 7th season.
So this place has had 0 offers?
People seem to be scared off on account of it being haunted.
When speaking to the Associated Press, Herzog, who will be playing a villain in The Mandalorian, applauded the series as a return to classic filmmaking compared to other slick blockbuster projects, saying, "The Mandalorian was filmed not at all like the other Star Wars or other big event films with green screen everywhere. You see the landscape, you see the formation. The camera could even be handheld and move in between us, seeing the same landscape. It's not green screen and artificiality. It brings movie making back to where it should be. It's a phenomenal achievement." Although Ahmed Abtahi was excited about landing a role in The Mandalorian, according to Discussing Film, he wasn't always a Star Wars fanatic. He told the outlet, "I hadn't seen any of the Star Wars films other than The Last Jedi, but when I got offered the role, I realized I had to go and watch them and fell madly in love with them, and now I am beating myself for waiting so long to watch it." While it's rumored the newly minted Star Wars fan will be playing an ex-Imperial intelligence officer named Dr. Pershing, not much else is known of Abtahi's role. The American-Iranian actor has appeared in quite a few movies and TV shows throughout the 2000s. While he is perhaps best known for his role in the Star series American Gods, he has also appeared in films like 2012's Oscar-winning Argo and 2015's The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2. You might also recognize him for his small roles in various episodes of popular television series, including Better Call Saul. In The Mandalorian, Bernard Bolin will be playing the mysterious role of Father. Although this is almost definitely his most high-profile gig to date, the Spanish-British actor is no stranger to the screen. He has appeared in several television shows, both foreign and domestic, and even has a few movie roles under his belt. He briefly appeared on TNT's The Last Ship, and also played an actor playing Christopher Columbus in the CW's Jane the Virgin. It's unclear how significant a role he will be playing in The Mandalorian, but Bolin may well be poised for a major breakout moment. Just like The Mandalorian's inaugural season, chapters 9 through 16 are peppered with dialogue culled from deep dives into Star Wars lore. Here are just some of the lines that mean more than you realized. But a quick word of warning before we begin. A galaxy of spoilers are ahead. When Cobb Vanth meets Mando in Chapter 9, he's clearly hoping things won't get violent. In fact, he almost instantly orders, quote, 2 snorts of spotchka for them. The Weequay bartender then hands over a bottle of blue liquid and a couple of cups. While Cobb takes a drink, Mando never gets to partake in the beverage, but it's still an interesting allusion to the show's premiere season. Season 1's Chapter 4 is the first time that spotchka is mentioned in the Star Wars universe. It's a blue drink made from tiny aquatic creatures called krill. The krill represent the livelihood of the same village Mando and Cara Dune help protect from nearby raiders. The callback is likely intentional, considering Mando finds himself in a similar situation in Chapter 9 by helping a small community to organize and eliminate a big threat. Chapter 9 ends with one of the most long-awaited reveals in Star Wars history, the return of Boba Fett, and consequently the confirmation he survived his drop into the Great Pit of Carkoon in Return of the Jedi. In a commentary track for the film, George Lucas said that he had considered adding a scene to show the bounty hunter had survived. Also, in Star Wars books no longer considered canon, it's explained that Boba escaped and is still alive. While in The Mandalorian, Boba doesn't reveal how he survived the Sarlacc, it's possible an exchange between Mando and Cobb in Chapter 9 could give us a hint. When Mando, Cobb, and the Tusken Raiders first arrive at the Krayt Dragon's lair, Mando tells Cobb the beast lives in an abandoned Sarlacc pit. Cobb responds that he's lived on Tatooine his whole life and there's no such thing as an abandoned Sarlacc pit. Mando quickly retorts that there is if you eat the Sarlacc. It seems unlikely the Great Pit of Carkoon is the abandoned pit we see in Chapter 9. The terrain is a lot different from the scene featuring the beast in Return of the Jedi. Still, the revelation that there is a creature on Tatooine capable of eating Sarlaccs gives us one possible explanation for Boba's survival. In the beginning of Chapter 9's final battle with the Krayt Dragon, Mando utters something that sounds like a curse. As the beast begins to back up into his lair, Mando says, "Dank Farrik, it's going back in." It's an expression that's repeated throughout the rest of Season 2 by Mando and other characters.
Dank Farrik.
While we don't know exactly what the curse means, it's a callback to the very beginning of The Mandalorian's first episode. When we initially hear the phrase, it's spoken by Mando's first bounty in the series, the blue-skinned mithril Mando captures in a bar. Shortly after he and his prisoner arrive at the Razor Crest, the ferry that brought them across the ice is devoured by a monstrous Ravenek, and looks like Mando's ship is its next target. As the pair quickly board the craft, the mithril yells out, "Dank Farrik, that was close." It's interesting that Mando is now repeating lines from a former bounty, though he doesn't quite find himself in the same situation as the mithril. It always seems like Mando can't take a single step forward on his journey without doing yet another job for someone else first, and Chapter 10 is no different. After his adventures in and around Mos Pelgo, Mando returns to Mos Eisley to find another lead on Mandalorians and a task he has to perform for the intel. The mechanic Peli Motto introduces Mando to someone known only as the Frog Lady, who knows where a group of the elusive warriors live. But she wants a trip back home in return for the information. As she's giving Mando the lowdown on what she knows, Peli translates for him.
She said her husband has settled on the estuary moon of Trask in the system of the gas giant Kolaiban.
The names of both the moon and the gas giant are references to heroes from the Star Wars Legends narrative. The moon Trask is named for Trask Olgo, a character from the 2003 role-playing video game Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Trask is an officer in the Galactic Republic as well as a native of the doomed planet Alderaan. Cole Iban, on the other hand, is named for a character from the world of comics, Cole Skywalker. He's a Jedi descendant to both Anakin and Luke, who appears in the Dark Horse comics Star Wars Legacy. Chapter 12 sees the return of a number of characters, including Horatio Sands reprising his role as the Mithril, Mando's first target in Chapter 1. We also learn that it was Greef Karga who put up the bounty on the amphibious alien. After Greef tells Mando that the Mithril is now working for him to pay off his debt, the bounty hunter responds that he should let him know if the alien tries to run away again. The Mithril has a quick comeback to this suggestion.
Let me assure you, I do not want to spend any more time in carbonite. Still can't see out of my left eye.
This is a callback to the finale of the original Star Wars trilogy, Return of the Jedi. After being freed from carbonite in Jabba's palace, the panicked Han Solo says he can't see, and Leia explains that blindness is a temporary side effect from being frozen in carbonite. We don't know exactly how long it's been since the Mithril was freed from carbonite, but it seems strange he would still suffer symptoms from the freezing. It could be he's fishing for sympathy, or it could also be a ploy to put Greef off his guard in hopes of a future escape. After all, the Mithril isn't known for his honesty. Even if he is telling the truth, there's a good chance neither Greef, Cara, nor Mando believe him about his bad eye, since they let him drive the speeder on their way to the Imperial outpost. As Mando and his companions are on their way out of the Navarro Imperial outpost, they come across a lab filled with deformed bodies floating in tanks. In spite of their tight schedule, the heroes pause to access records to find out what the lab is actually all about. Mithril plays a hollow recording of Dr. Pershing, the Imperial doctor who works on the child in the first season. Among other things, Pershing reports, quote, "There were promising effects for an entire fortnight, but then, sadly, the body rejected the blood. I highly doubt we'll find a donor with a higher M count, though." By higher M count, Dr. Pershing is referring to one of the most controversial pieces of the Star Wars mythos, midichlorians. In The Phantom Menace, we learn that every Jedi's blood includes higher than average amounts of midichlorians, and that it's through communication with these microscopic life forms that Jedi find their special connection to the Force. The fact that this concept still remains so polarizing among some fans may be why Pershing says M count rather than midichlorian count, allowing viewers on the thumbs down side of the debate to imagine M stands for something else. At the same time, the presence of the lab and Pershing's recording have fed widespread speculation that the experiments have something to do with the cloning of Palpatine and the creation of Supreme Leader Snoke. Chapter 13 of The Mandalorian sees the long-anticipated live-action premiere of Ahsoka Tano, played by Rosario Dawson. The former Jedi teams up with Mando against the forces of Magistrate Morgan Elsbeth. After some close calls, Ahsoka defeats the Magistrate in a duel. Once she has Elsbeth at her mercy, Ahsoka demands to know one thing.
Now tell me, Where is your master? Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
Thrawn is a villain too good to be left on the cutting room floor of Star Wars canon. The blue-skinned Imperial first appeared in Timothy Zahn's Thrawn novel trilogy, starting with 1991's Heir to the Empire and concluding with 1993's The Last Command. While these novels have officially joined the list of Star Wars media no longer considered canon, Thrawn was also featured in Star Wars Rebels. Ahsoka's lines let us know that Thrawn is still alive, and it's extremely important that she finds him. It could very well be that Ahsoka's hunt for the Admiral will be the focus of the upcoming Disney Plus Ahsoka Tano series. Chapter 15 is another great example of just how far Mando is willing to go to rescue Grogu. With the aid of the newly appointed New Republic Marshal Cara Dune, Mando recruits former foe Migs Mayfield to help him infiltrate an Imperial facility in order to access a computer that can give him the location of Moff Gideon. Once they're inside, Mayfield refuses to approach the computer console after spotting a former commanding officer. Mando decides to do it himself and makes a surprising choice to remove a stormtrooper helmet he's wearing as a disguise and expose his face. When Mayfield's old commander starts questioning Mando, he swoops in to save the day, successfully bluffing the officer into believing they're the genuine article. He also tries to make a quick work excuse so they can get away from him.
Come on, let's go fill out those TPS reports so we can go recharge the power coil.
Mentioning TPS reports is no doubt a reference to the 1999 cult classic Office Space. In the comedy, Ron Livingston plays Peter, a passionless office worker at a software company who is being hounded by his supervisor Bill Lundberg about his TPS reports.
Yeah. You see, we're putting the cover sheets on all TPS reports now before they go out.
Though decades old now, Office Space is often still referenced and quoted by a wide variety of fans, even in a galaxy far, far away. In Chapter 15, Mayfield reveals himself to be a much more layered character than he originally appears to be in the first season. He and Mando are corralled into sharing drinks with the Imperial officer Valen Hess, the same officer Mayfield avoids earlier. We soon learn Hess holds an important place in Mayfield's history, one with such weight, in fact, that Mayfield allows it to overtake his emotions and blow his cover. As Hess asks for ideas for toasts, Mayfield suggests, how about a toast to Operation Cinder? Initially, Hess seems impressed by Mayfield, turning to Mando and saying, now there's a man who knows his history. We soon learn Mayfield served under Hess during the operation and was traumatized by what occurred. When you find out about Operation Cinder, his reaction is completely understandable. It wasn't something dreamed up specifically for The Mandalorian, but instead has been mentioned in numerous Star Wars video games, comics, and other media. Cinder is Palpatine's contingency plan in the case of his death, to make sure the galaxy's civilizations don't outlive him. Weeks after the Battle of Endor, the Empire sets Operation Cinder in motion, using satellite arrays to cause disastrous climate changes on different planets, including Naboo. No official number has ever been given for the amount of deaths, but it was clearly significant enough to make Mayfield shoot Hess for his involvement. Early in Chapter 16, Mando returns to Trask with allies, hoping to enlist the help of the Mandalorians he found there. Bo-Katan and Casca are not happy to see Mando accompanied by Boba, whose voice they recognize as those of the clones created on Kamino. Casca and Boba exchange a few barbs, eventually leading to a brief altercation. Before things get violent, Boba warns the younger Casca to calm down. She responds by saying, "You'll be talking through the window of a Bacta tank." Bacta tanks aren't a particularly obscure part of Star Wars lore, though you don't often hear them referred to by name. There are cylindrical tanks filled with Bacta fluid, which is known for its healing properties. Probably the most prominent use of a Bacta tank comes early in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke Skywalker is submerged in one of the tanks after being rescued on the planet Hoth by Han Solo.
You might not guess it from the silhouette, but a Mandalorian's armor is as unique as their fingerprints. Handed down through generations, the distinctive armor is a defining trait of the Mandalorian people and their culture. This is the history of Mandalorian armor explained. The Mandalorians are a nomadic people, but they're not a species. Anyone can be a Mandalorian if they practice the tenets of their faith. Before The Mandalorian, Boba Fett was one of the most well-known Mandalorians in the Star Wars universe. But although he wore Mandalorian armor, he didn't really grow up in the culture, and therefore is not a true Mandalorian. Because Mandalorians are a warlike people who often act as mercenaries, wearing armor is one of the 6 actions central to their identity, according to Star Wars novelist Karen Traviss. The other 5 are speaking the Mandalorian language, contributing to the welfare of their clan, defending themselves and their families, raising their children as Mandalorians, and rallying around the sole leader of their people, the Mandalore, when asked. Yet, even though their armor is a central part of their culture, Mandalorians like reminding each other that what's inside matters most. A warrior is more than his armor, is one popular Mandalorian saying. Early Mandalorian armor appeared during Season 2 of the animated series Star Wars The Clone Wars. The episode The Mandalore Plot showed a mural depicting ancient Mandalorian crusaders wearing helmets over their cloaks as they fought the Jedi Knights. To battle the Force powers of the Jedi, the Mandalorians modified their fighting style and weaponry. Clone Wars director Dave Filoni once told comicbook.com, "The Mandalorian Jedi War that I have in my mind is very much derived from the oldest style of thinking of Mandalorians, which was that their weapons, their arsenal, their technology had a massive increase once they collided with the Jedi and found these Force-wielding people that had abilities they didn't understand." Filoni continued, "Their armor is a reaction to the Jedi. And I've always believed that because that seemed to be something that would be in the DNA of the Joe Johnston designs of them as super commandos." Johnston, who directed Captain America: The First Avenger and The Rocketeer, was a concept artist on the original Star Wars trilogy. Incidentally, Filoni became the showrunner on the animated series Star Wars Rebels and is now a writer and director on The Mandalorian. Both Star Wars: The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels delve into other Mandalorian armor history tied to the Mandalorian Civil War, which split the group into the pacifist New Mandalorians and the militant Death Watch. Although many fans would recognize a Mandalorian by their armor, specifically the full-face helmet with the T-shaped visor, this schism revealed other variations, particularly in the helmets. For instance, the female warriors of Death Watch, known as the Night Owls, wore helmets with eye slits that would tilt up like an owl's. Sabine Wren, the Star Wars Rebels character who is a Mandalorian warrior and demolitions expert, has a Night Owl's helmet that she inherited. Speaking of Sabine, she doesn't follow the strict helmet rules that Din Djarin outlines on The Mandalorian. Namely, that he can't remove his helmet in front of other people, or his vow is broken and he's no longer part of his tribe. Sabine often goes without her helmet, even though she usually wears her armor. A Mandalorian's armor includes a lot of accessories. The helmet, for instance, has a comlink with an antenna. It also includes night vision, a tactical display, facial and vocal recognition, a fingerprint scanner, video recording, links to vehicles and weapons, and flight controls for the jetpacks that Mandalorians use to be more maneuverable in battle. In The Mandalorian, Din Djarin receives a jetpack from the armorer at the end of Season 1, which he uses to fight against Moff Gideon. Mando fares pretty well, considering that he's still learning the controls, unlike the undignified trajectory of Boba Fett in Star Wars: Return of the Jedi. One key part of the Mandalorian's arsenal is the Vanbrace, a wrist gauntlet chock full of various weaponry, including a 25-meter-long retractable fiber cord, flamethrower, energy shield protector, trackers, laser-targeting sights, launchers for tranquilizing or explosive darts, a mini rocket launcher, motion detectors, repulsors, a communication system, and a touchscreen display. Next to its well-known silhouette, Mandalorian armor is also known for its toughness, thanks to Beskar, a material that's also called Mandalorian iron or Mandalorian steel. Beskar protects against blaster shots as well as lightsaber strikes, but it's also lightweight, allowing the wearers to be much more agile than, say, Tony Stark learning to fly in his Mark I suit in 2008's Iron Man.
Okay, this is where I don't want to be. Oh, not the car. Yikes.
Beskar has such remarkable strength because of both its natural properties and Mandalorian metalworking techniques. Din Djarin causes a stir when a client pays him in bars of Beskar. Another Mandalorian remembers how the rare metal could be mined only on their home planet of Mandalore and was likely stolen during the Great Purge. In The Mandalorian's first episode, the armorer uses a bar of Beskar to forge a new pauldron, or shoulder plate, for Mando. The colors and markings on Mandalorian armor can be highly varied and are often used to express lineage or state of mind, according to Travis. That said, Mandalorians also decorate their armor according to taste. They'll repaint their armor if they change clans or if they're on a particular task. Sabine Wren, for instance, often changed her armor's markings much like she changed her hair color, adding a prominent insignia in her starboard design, a precursor to the emblem of the Rebel Alliance. Blue and green are popular armor colors for Mandalorians who like to be conspicuous, Travis wrote, referencing another Mandalorian saying, "It's one thing to see us coming, and another to do something about it." Mandalorian armor doesn't just provide protection. It's also an heirloom because Beskar can last for hundreds of years. As Sabine Wren once said, "The armor I wear is 500 years old. I reforged it to my liking, but the battles, the history, the blood all lives within it." And the same goes for every Mandalorian. Travis explained in Star Wars Insider that as a nomadic people, Mandalorians frugally invested much of their wealth into their armor and weapons. This was certainly practical because they could take their earnings with them. Early in The Mandalorian, Mando receives a large payment of Beskar after delivering the child to the mysterious Imperial client. After Mando presents the Beskar to the armorer, she suggests that she can craft a full cuirass for him, plus whistling birds, a type of mini-missile. The excess he donates to the foundlings, the orphaned children the Mandalorians protect. Catching up afterward with Grief Karga, head of the Bounty Hunters Guild, Mando draws several stares over his shiny new threads. But he's really just following the investment strategy of ancient Mandalorians. Besides, Karga notes, the grumblers are just jealous that they didn't get all that loot. Mandalorians love personalized armor. Sabine Wren embraced this part of Mandalorian culture throughout Star Wars Rebels, and not just through her signature design. Rebels fans know that she kept the armor's insulating body glove but stripped away a lot of the other pieces for maximum mobility. She also upgraded her helmet's electronics, although she used the video and image recording abilities to capture her artwork much more than the targeting viewfinder. On The Mandalorian, the armorer has strikingly distinctive armor, from the fur across the backplate to the shape of her eyes on her helmet. Polygon notes that her helmet also appears to have Zabrak horns, which could be a reference to Darth Maul, a Zabrak who briefly ruled Mandalore and headed the Death Watch on Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Mandalorian armor often has sigils, or symbols painted on the chest plate or helmet indicating their lineage, allegiance, or even awards for bravery, according to Travis. The armor can also have a signet specifying the wearer's particular clan. When The Mandalorian begins, Din Djarin has no signet. Even though he was adopted by the Mandalorians as an orphan, was trained as a warrior, and joined their tribe, he starts the first season as a classic Western lone wolf archetype. That changes once he meets the child, who uses his force powers to help Din defeat a charging mudhorn, a creature that resembles a gigantic rhino. When the armorer suggests that he has earned the mudhorn as a signet for felling the creature, he declines, saying that it wasn't a noble kill. But once Din has a change of heart and retrieves the child from the Imperials who want his power, the armorer decides that Din is worthy of such an honor. She forges a mudhorn signet for him and instructs him to take care of the green foundling and to return the child to his own kind if possible. In the meantime, she says, "You are a clan of two." Over the past 4 decades, Star Wars has spawned plenty of movies, animated shows, and video games, but live-action television has always been the one unconquered frontier in the Star Wars universe, at least until now. At Star Wars Celebration 2019, showrunner and creator Jon Favreau repeatedly emphasized that The Mandalorian will be one giant love letter to the original Star Wars trilogy, and that tribute extends behind the scenes as well. Favreau wants to make sure The Mandalorian feels like our first visit to that galaxy far, far away. Naturally, green screens and CGI are necessary to deliver The Mandalorian on a TV budget, but Favreau says that the crew is also using puppets, animatronics, and special effects makeup wherever possible. For example, while the dogfights in the modern Star Wars films are mostly computer-generated, Favreau really wanted to make a model of the Razor Crest to use during production. Well, Industrial Light and Magic's art staff were so excited about the idea that they didn't just make a model. Unprompted, they went home and built a camera rig in their garages, recreating the hardware that was used to make Star Wars back in 1977. The end result looks just like classic Star Wars films.
You'll see this is done. Isn't that cool? It already feels like Luke's X-Wing, right?
ILM's staff aren't the only Star Wars fans who got in on the Mandalorian action either. The show's producers reached out to the 501st Legion, a group of Star Wars fans who make their own highly detailed stormtrooper outfits. Lucasfilm has teamed up with the 501st before for promotional events, but The Mandalorian marks the first time that the 501st has appeared on screen in an official Star Wars production. All of Star Wars owes a huge debt to George Lucas. After all, he created the thing. But The Mandalorian has some specific ties to Star Wars maker. For one, the show is heavily inspired by the first Star Wars movie, especially the opening act and the cantina scene. However, as Giancarlo Esposito has revealed, Lucas's input on the series goes a lot deeper than that. According to Esposito, Lucas actually contributed some creative ideas to the show. While discussing The Mandalorian with Collider, Esposito said that Jon Favreau, quote, figured it out with George Lucas himself and worked directly with him to make sure the show felt like classic Star Wars. Star Wars and video games have always enjoyed a healthy relationship, and The Mandalorian pushes it to the next level. While Jon Favreau and his team used practical effects as much as they could to capture the original Star Wars handmade charm, digital wizardry was key in bringing The Mandalorian's exotic worlds to life. But how did Favreau and the actors know what their fictional locations were supposed to look like? By using a game engine, of course. Video game software is great at rendering detailed 3D environments in real time, and the Mandalorian team used that tech to create digital sets that the cast and crew could film and see the results in real time. Not only did that speed up production, but it let the Mandalorian's creative minds get an excellent read on what the finished product would look like and adjust accordingly. The results should speak for themselves. Thanks to Boba Fett, we knew what a Mandalorian looked like decades before we knew anything about them as a people, and the Mandalorian wouldn't be the same without him. Boba Fett debuted during the Star Wars Holiday Special, and while the rest of the program isn't worth your time, Nelvana Studios' animated short The Faithful Wookiee absolutely is. Not only does the sequence make Fett cooler than the movies ever did, but the design ended up influencing both how the Mandalorians looked on the Clone Wars. It also set the standard for the Mandalorian's costume. That narrow visor, the big ol' holster, the natural color scheme, and the visible battle damage, those are all from his old short. It also gives an idea as to what the Mandalorian might look like. In fact, Nelvana's animators looked to westerns when storyboarding the short. The faithful Wookiee's surreal landscapes and the dinosaur that Boba rides might be a little too fanciful for live-action TV, but if you want to see Star Wars reimagined as a spaghetti western, you don't have to wait for The Mandalorian's premiere. There's already an example out in the wild. If you're worried that creator Jon Favreau isn't up to the task of bringing Star Wars to the small screen, don't be. He's got some help. Longtime Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy is listed as one of the show's producers, and all of the material will still go through Lucasfilm's Story Group, the organization in charge of keeping Star Wars canon consistent. Favreau's also getting a big hand from the animated side of things. Dave Filoni may not be a household name, but if you're a modern-day Star Wars fan, you know his work. Filoni directed the Clone Wars feature film, and he worked side by side with George Lucas to bring the subsequent animated series to the air. Filoni also co-created both Rebels and the newest Star Wars cartoon, Resistance. In other words, he's the guy behind a lot of the best parts of modern Star Wars canon. According to The Art of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Filoni is the brains behind Anakin Skywalker's beloved apprentice, Ahsoka Tano. On Rebels, Filoni and his staff raised questions about the Jedi's relationship with the Force years before Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi did the same.
Revenge is not the Jedi way.
I am no Jedi.
Heck, he even voiced Chopper, Rebels' scene-stealing droid. Filoni is serving as one of the show's executive producers, and he'll make his live-action directing debut by helming The Mandalorian's very first episode. The Mandalorian takes place about 5 years after Return of the Jedi and 25 years before The Force Awakens, making the galaxy a very different place than what you're used to. The ragtag Rebel Alliance has transformed itself into the New Republic, a representative democracy that spans many known planets. The Galactic Empire, on the other hand, hasn't been as fortunate. After the Battle of Jakku brought the Galactic Civil War to a close, what remained of the main Imperial fleet retreated to the mysterious Unknown regions, where it will eventually reform into the First Order. Not yet, though. The First Order is still years away. It's a time of transition. Out on the Outer Rim, where the Mandalorian takes place, former Imperial warlords are scrambling to hold on to power. Former rebels are trying to figure out where they belong now that the fighting has stopped. Criminals try to profit off the confusion, and the Mandalorian's main characters are all caught right in the middle of it. The Mandalorian isn't even out yet, and it's already a hit. Or at the very least, Disney seems extremely confident that it'll be one. Months before The Mandalorian debuted, Jon Favreau got the green light to start writing Season 2. By the time the cast and crew started making the rounds to promote the first season, filming on the second was already underway. Season 2 adds a couple of new directors to its already stacked lineup. For one, Favreau will actually get to helm an episode or two of the series this time around. During season 1, he was too busy on Disney's The Lion King to take a direct role behind the camera. The Mandalorian cast member Carl Weathers will also direct a season 2 installment. In fact, his interest in sitting in the director's chair was one of the main reasons why he joined the series.
Dreams are worth fighting for. Now, are you gonna be a fighter? Or are you gonna be a doctor?
You're right, Carl Weathers.
Favreau promises that there are plenty of surprises and a few old Legends characters in the pipeline. Don't give up on The Mandalorian when season 1 ends in December. The show is just getting started. Just 3 episodes in, the new season of the smash Disney Plus hit The Mandalorian has continued to see Mando and the child exploring parts yet unseen in the galaxy far, far away. It's also found them encountering creatures too frightful to mention for those who fear things with more than 4 legs. Chapter 11 of The Mandalorian thankfully took a bit of a break from the creature feature fantasia that dominated the first 2 episodes. Well, sort of. Titled The Heiress, the latest entry in Mando's quest to return the child to his people, saw the duo hitting the high seas, and indeed running into yet another beastly foe. Luckily, Mando also ran into some people of his own, as he and the child are helped out of their jam by a band of Mandalorian allies. While this episode of The Mandalorian expands the world of the weapon-worshipping religious sect in fascinating new ways, the arrival of those helmet-eschewing allies undoubtedly delighted die-hard Star Wars fans, because there are some very familiar Clone Wars names involved. Chief among this is Bo-Katan, who featured prominently in the beloved animated series as the head of House Kryze and former Regent of Mandalore.
What are you waiting for? Get out there!
She was also the one-time wielder of the Darksaber, whose history she also details in The Heiress. While Star Wars fans were no doubt elated to hear the story and see Bo-Katan in the flesh, they were likely just as happy to see the face of the actor portraying the fearsome warrior, as she also voiced the character in the animated series. Her name is Katie Sackhoff, and any true sci-fi fan should be quite familiar with her face. Here's why Bo-Katan from The Mandalorian looks so familiar. If you do call yourself a true sci-fi fan, Katie Sackhoff's face is probably familiar to you, because it was often front and center on one of the best-loved sci-fi programs of the past 2 decades. That series was Ronald D. Moore's utterly brilliant modern update of the classic sci-fi saga Battlestar Galactica, which found the last remnants of humanity on the run from a murderous race of man-made android enemies, and in desperate search of a fabled planet that may serve as mankind's new home.
I've been to Earth. I know where it is.
The series premiered on Sci-Fi back in 2004 and quickly became a massive hit with both fans of the original 1970s show and those who had never heard of Adama, Apollo, Cylons, or Viper fighters. Even if they'd never heard those names, it's possible they had heard the name Starbuck before, not only from the pages of Herman Melville's iconic novel Moby Dick, but also because the hotshot Viper pilot's name was probably the most prominent to arise from the original Battlestar Galactica series. Portrayed by Dirk Benedict in the original series, Starbuck got a much-needed modernizing for the sci-fi series reboot, with Moore transforming the cocksure pilot into a fearsome femme the likes of which sci-fi fans had never really seen before. And yes, Katie Sackhoff was the actor tasked with resurrecting the character for the new Battlestar Galactica. To simply say she did that would be a gross understatement, though. More than any actor in the series, Sackhoff didn't just resurrect her character, she wholly reinvented it, delivering what can only be described as a towering performance almost too big even for the epic series around it. Of course, if you somehow slept on Battlestar Galactica over the years, it's possible you recognize Sackhoff from a plethora of other notable small-screen turns, as the actor has also appeared on the likes of Longmire, 24, and most recently Netflix's Another Life. She also turned up in a certain CW Arrowverse hit as one of DC Comics' toughest underground kingpins. That Arrowverse hit is none other than The Flash, which means the underground in question belongs to Barry Allen's hometown of Central City. And yes, that was indeed Katie Sackhoff portraying the nefarious Amunet Black on the hit CW drama. A metahuman with significant power, Amunet Black was the premier dealer of weaponizing tech on Central City's black market. and therefore supplied many of Team Flash's foes with the destructive tools of their villainous trades. In turn, Amunet Black's business dealings more often than not put her in direct conflict with Barry and his allies. In spite of her prominent role in the Central City underworld, Sackhoff's character appeared in just 6 episodes of The Flash during its 7-season run on the CW, most of which came in the series' 4th season. But even in such a limited capacity, Sackhoff more than made her mark on the series, crafting a villainess as ruthless, relentless, and delightfully devious as any that has ever faced off against Barry and his do-gooding gang, even if the character doesn't always get the respect she so richly deserves. While Katie Sackhoff has largely made her name on television, the actor has managed to rack up some impressive big-screen credits over the years. She actually got her first big break after landing a key role in 2002's flawed but fun Halloween sequel, Halloween Resurrection, and has since appeared in genre delights like 2013's Riddick and 2016's gothic chiller Don't Knock Twice. If you want to see Katie Sackhoff at her big screen best, however, look no further than the 2013 Creeper she made with Mike Flanagan. Yes, that Mike Flanagan, the very genre mastermind behind such modern horror classics as Hush, Gerald's Game, Dr. Sleep, and Netflix's breathtaking The Haunting of Hill House series. Before delivering those frightful delights to the masses, Flanagan actually scored a modest hit with a little haunted mirror creeper by the name of Oculus. It's understandable if the term haunted mirror made you cringe a little. And the initial setup of Flanagan's Oculus, which follows a woman attempting to clear her brother of murder charges by proving the culprit was actually the haunted artifact in question, really is a bit silly. But if Flanagan has proven anything over the years, it's that he can turn even the silliest of premises into a soul-stirring and genuinely terrifying cinematic treat. That's just what Flanagan does with Oculus, delivering a haunted mirror marvel that simply has no business being as effective as it is. Flanagan bolsters the film's impact by pulling brilliant turns from his cast, including Karen Gillan, Brenton Thwaites, Rory Cochrane, and a never-better Katie Sackhoff as the tragically departed family matriarch.
The saga of the planet Mandalore is spread across 90s comic book series Tales of the Jedi, the animated series The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and the live-action series The Mandalorian. Here is the history of Mandalore explained. After the runaway success of the original Star Wars in 1977, the future was wide open for sequel The Empire Strikes Back. Among the many abandoned concepts for the second part of the original trilogy was an army of Imperial Super Troopers, armored badasses from the Mandalore system. As conceived by George Lucas and designed by visual effects supervisor Joe Johnston and concept artist Ralph McQuarrie, the Super Troopers would have an ancient grudge against the Jedi and an array of weapons integrated into their suits to combat them. These concepts would end up forming the basis of Mandalorians as we know them much later, but at the time, the budget simply didn't exist to manufacture dozens, if not hundreds of these new costumes, which were much more intricate than the Stormtrooper outfits created for the first film. The idea of Super Troopers was scrapped, but the design was undeniably great and a new individual character was conceived to wear it, the bounty hunter Boba Fett. The costume was given some color and some wear to it to give it a sense of history, and to distinguish it from proper Imperial attire. Like Sith or Palpatine, the words Mandalore and Mandalorian are never uttered in the original trilogy, but fans came to know it and associate it with the armor through the wealth of ancillary material released about the film universe throughout the 1980s and 90s.
You may take Captain Solo to Jabba the Hutt after I have Skywalker.
He's no good to me dead.
The fact that Boba Fett says and does very little in his first 2 film appearances did nothing to dampen fan enthusiasm to learn more about him and the origin of his slick armor. The original Star Wars expanded universe, comprised of novels, comics, video games, and tabletop RPG sourcebooks published between 1978 and 2014, offered an enormous amount of information about the bounty hunter and the culture from which he hails, the Mandalorians. Their homeworld of Mandalore became the setting of many stories and home to an army of characters wearing variations on the beloved costume design. Mandalore is established to be a planet on the outer rim of the galaxy, and the namesake of an entire sector of space. A temperate Earth-like world, Mandalore is notable for being the exclusive home of a near-indestructible metal called Beskar, from which its resident warrior culture constructs their armor. The Mandalorian religion demands war and conquest, and Mandalore becomes the seat of an expanding empire during the Old Republic era, thousands of years before the Skywalker saga. This leads to war against the Sith, the Jedi, the Republic, and frequently themselves, as Mandalore lacks a central government. In the year 738 BBY, the Jedi and Republic resolved to preempt the threat of Mandalorian expansion by bombarding their core worlds, including Mandalore itself. The Mandalorian excision leaves their empire in ruins. By the time of the Clone Wars, the surface of Mandalore is a barren desert. Its remaining cities are housed beneath giant domes, and generations of resentment still exist between the Mandalorians and the Jedi. However, this may not have always been the case, as at least one Mandalorian served the Jedi Order 1,000 years ago, around the height of the Old Republic. The Mandalorian Jedi, named Tar Vizsla, invents a unique lightsaber called the Darksaber that becomes a legendary totem, a sort of Mandalorian Excalibur. After Tar Vizsla's death, the Darksaber is entombed at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, but is later liberated by his descendants and returned to Mandalore, where for generations its wielder commands the respect of all Mandalorian clans. The blade is either passed down through inheritance or won through single combat. While there is only one Darksaber, traditional armor is also built specifically to mimic or counter the abilities of the Jedi. Its repulsors mimic a force push, while its flamethrower is difficult for Jedi to parry with a lightsaber. The Beskar used to create this armor is, likewise, passed down and recast across generations. A generation before the Clone Wars break out across the galaxy, Mandalore is wrenched by a civil war of its own, devastating the population. When the war is over, a peace movement builds momentum across the planet, leading to the birth of a new pacifist government. Mandalorians who still wish to follow their warrior tradition are exiled from the planet to its moon, Concordia, where they rally behind the Darksaber and form a rogue fighting force called Death Watch. The pacifist New Mandalorians are led by Duchess Satine Kryze and appointed Prime Minister Olmec, whose reforms reshape Mandalore into a society more closely resembling that of peaceful and prosperous worlds in the core of the Galactic Republic. When war breaks out between the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems, Satine insists that Mandalore remain neutral and becomes the leader of the Council of Neutral Systems.
As the designated regent of 1,500 systems, I speak for thousands of worlds that have urged me to allow them to stay neutral in this war.
This decision allows the New Mandalorians to remain pacifist, but it also ends up costing them in other ways, as it strains their diplomatic relationship with the Republic nearly to its breaking point, and both sides in the Clone Wars bar Mandalorians from using their space lanes for trade. The public is forced to rely on an expensive black market for goods, a practice for which Prime Minister Olmec is eventually arrested and removed from office. The Death Watch's leader, Pre Vizsla, sees the new pacifist Mandalore as weak and disgraceful, and seeks a way to return to the homeworld and seize power. However, Death Watch's ranks are thin and Satine is a popular leader. Vizsla finds an ally in Count Dooku, leader of the Coalition of Independent Systems, and they hatch a plot to turn the public against Satine and open the door for his triumphant return to Mandalore. Dooku and Vizsla arrange a bombing on Mandalore, prompting Satine and visiting Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi to investigate. They discover that Death Watch is behind the bombing and that the CIS may be involved, which prompts the Republic Senate to consider installing a military presence on Mandalore, against Satine's will, in order to keep the planet out of separatist hands. This is all part of Dooku's plan, since a Republic occupation would be enormously unpopular among the Mandalorian public. Death Watch would return to rid the planet of the invaders, throw Satine under the bus, and take charge with the full support of the people. Satine, Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Padme Amidala managed to unravel this plan and dissuade the Senate from approving this invasion. After this failure, Count Dooku cuts ties with Pre Vizsla, and Death Watch retreats deeper into the Mandalorian sector. During their travels across space, Death Watch happens upon a craft carrying 2 wounded passengers, former Sith apprentice Maul and his own charge and brother, Savage Opress. Like Vizsla, Maul hates the Jedi and holds a bitter grudge against Obi-Wan Kenobi. Sensing an opportunity, Vizsla invites Maul to team up and retake Mandalore, which would provide Maul an opportunity to take revenge on Kenobi. Maul accepts and formulates a plan similar to Dooku's, arrange for a massive crime wave on Mandalore that is beyond Duchess Satine's peacekeepers' capacity to repel, therefore allowing Death Watch to return as conquering heroes. Pre Vizsla endorses the plan, offering Death Watch as muscle to force the galaxy's 3 biggest crime syndicates to cooperate. The scheme goes off without a hitch, as the crime wave turns the public against Satine's pacifist leadership and gives Pre Vizsla the opening he needs to clean up the mess and win their support.
Death Watch is here to save you from these intergalactic gangsters that threaten our great city.
Once he's thrown Satine in jail and taken the throne for himself, Vizsla attempts to dispose of Maul and Opress, but finds finds he's underestimated them. Maul always planned to consolidate the syndicates and to use Mandalore as the seat of his new criminal empire, and to him, it's Vizsla who's outlived his usefulness. Maul kills Vizsla in ritual combat, winning the Darksaber, leadership of Death Watch, and the Mandalorian throne. Maul keeps his newfound power a secret from the public, reinstalling Olmec as his puppet prime minister. While much of Death Watch falls in line behind their new leader, Pre-Vizsla's Lieutenant Bo-Katan Kryze refuses to follow an outsider and leads a splinter group against Maul. Bo-Katan brings her sister Duchess Satine from prison, who in turn summons her star-crossed lover Obi-Wan Kenobi to Mandalore. This too plays into Maul's hands, as it affords him the opportunity to kill Satine in front of Kenobi, simultaneously eliminating a political rival and punishing his Jedi arch-nemesis. The attempt to quickly remove Maul from power is unsuccessful, and Kenobi and Bo-Katan's squad are forced to flee Mandalore. Months later, Bo-Katan convinces the Jedi Council to lend her a battalion to help her unseat Maul as ruler of Mandalore. Aided by Clone Commander Rex, ex-Jedi advisor Ahsoka Tano, and a segment of the 501st Legion, Bo-Katan's remaining loyal warriors lay siege to the capital city of Sundari. They are met by Maul's Death Watch, led by Gar Saxon of House Vizsla. Ahsoka Tano captures Maul after a hard-fought lightsaber duel, while Bo-Katan easily takes the throne room from relative pushover Olmec. With their leadership removed and their forces overwhelmed by the combined might of Bo-Katan's Mandalorians and the Republic's clones, Maul's forces surrender. The Republic names Bo-Katan the new regent of Mandalore, nominally granting the planet the self-determination they crave as they escape from under the boot of Maul's Shadow Collective. The Siege of Mandalore ends mere days before the fall of the Republic and its reformation into the Galactic Empire, which quickly shatters any illusions of Mandalorian independence. When Bo-Katan refuses to follow Emperor Palpatine's orders, she is stripped of her regency and replaced by a new Imperial governor, Maul's former right hand, Gar Saxon. Saxon creates a new army of Mandalorian super commandos, repurposing the armor and traditions of Death Watch to serve the Empire, and to punish any Mandalorian clan that doesn't fall in line behind the new order. One group of warriors, the Protectors, is permitted to go about their own affairs and carry on Mandalorian traditions, as long as they are in tune with Imperial interests.
Why would I fight the Empire when obviously destroying you is so much easier?
When they're discovered allowing the Rebel Alliance to use their hyperspace lanes, the entire clan is wiped out. Mandalore also plays host to an Imperial Academy, which not only trains stormtroopers and potential super commandos, but also conducts research and development for new weapons and technology. One Academy student, Sabine Wren, developed a weapon called the Arc Pulse Generator, which fires bursts of energy that seek out Beskar armor, superheating it and incinerating anyone inside, while leaving any other combatants totally untouched. Eager to prove her brilliance, Sabine builds a working prototype, but when she realizes that the Empire might actually use it against Mandalorians, she destroys it and leaves Mandalore to become a bounty hunter, and eventually a leader in the Rebel Alliance. Mandalore spends nearly 2 decades tightly under Imperial rule, its once proud clans brought to heel by Gar Saxon and his super commandos. Saxon makes an example of Clan Wren after Sabine's defection. Sabine's father is imprisoned and her brother Tristan is conscripted into the super commandos in order to assure Clan Wren's cooperation.
How can you wear that armor, Tristan? How could you join them?
You shouldn't have come back, Sabine.
Meanwhile, Sabine herself has been fighting the Empire as a member of Phoenix Squadron. During their travels, her team happens across the Darksaber, which has been missing for quite some time. Sabine learns to wield the saber as a weapon, but feels ill-suited to use it for its symbolic purpose, to rally all Mandalorians to her command. She brings the weapon back to her mother Ursa Wren's home on Cronest, in the hopes of recruiting Clan Wren into the Rebel Alliance. Gar Saxon intervenes, but he is defeated in single combat by Sabine, and then killed by Ursa before he can shoot Sabine in the back. Clan Wren begins to openly oppose the Empire, which brings other clans to their aid, including Clan Kryze, still led by Bo-Katan. Together with Sabine's Jedi friends Ezra Bridger and Kanan Jarrus, Clans Wren and Kryze return to Mandalore and defeat a plot by its new Imperial governor, Gar's brother Tiber Saxon, to use Sabine's Arc Pulse Generator against Mandalore. After this victory, Bo-Katan accepts the Darksaber, and a number of clans pledge loyalty to her and her fight to free Mandalore from the Empire. Little is yet known about the fate of Mandalore after the start of Bo-Katan's rebellion, but it does not appear to have gone well. A decade after the clans unite to oppose the Empire, Mandalorians have been all but wiped out after an event referred to as the Great Purge, during which the Empire slaughtered countless Mandalorians and forced the remainder into hiding. The Mandalorian's first season reveals that a small tribe of Mandalorians live in secret on the planet Navarro, leaving their underground home only one at a time in order to hide their numbers. This tribe, which may be one of many, practices a much more strict form of the Mandalorian religion than that demonstrated by other Mandalorians seen to date. These Mandalorians aren't even permitted to remove their helmets except in private.
This is the way.
Further evidence of the damage to Mandalore and its people is the Empire's raiding of its prized resources. Officers of the now-fallen Empire now possess large quantities of Beskar, stolen from either fallen warriors or the planet itself, which they sell back to Mandalorians in exchange for their service as bounty hunters. As seen in the Season 1 finale, the Darksaber itself was landed in the possession of Moff Gideon. During the second season of The Mandalorian, Mando's quest to return the child to his people leads him to Trask, a watery moon where he and the child almost meet their doom before they're saved by a trio of Mandalorians led by Bo-Katan. Mando is shocked when his saviors immediately doff their helmets, revealing themselves to be adherents of a very different sort of creed, but they're able to set aside their disagreements long enough to make a deal. If he helps them raid an ex-Imperial ship and steal weaponry, they'll put him on the right path toward a Jedi who can potentially train the child. Mando's new allies have more in mind for the raid than they're letting on, of course, as Bo-Katan reveals when she accosts the ship's commander and demands to know where Moff Gideon's holding the artifact she needs to claim her rightful place at the Mandalorian throne. But the commander kills himself before he can be forced to reveal any information. It's a disappointing setback, although with Gideon hunting Mando and Bo-Katan searching for Gideon, it's more than likely their paths will cross again, and reveal more about the history and current fate of Mandalore. The Mandalorian is a series that focuses on Din Djarin, but it's also pulled in beloved characters from many different areas of the Star Wars universe. Here are a few Season 2 characters that mean more than casual fans might think. Star Wars has always been a space western, but the Mandalorian episode The Marshal takes it even further. Here we meet a gunslinging space marshal named Cobb Vanth. With the Empire fallen and Jabba the Hutt taken down, Tatooine is left with a bunch of mining syndicates vying for power. Someone had to set things straight after the Resistance took down the Empire, so why not a space sheriff? Though the episode is Vanth's first on-screen appearance in the Star Wars universe, he originally appeared in Chuck Wendig's canon trilogy Aftermath. There, we learn that Vanth is a former slave, and has been protecting Freetown from Red Key raiders. Even though it isn't likely that most fans of The Mandalorian have read the Aftermath trilogy, we still may see more of Vanth's part of the galaxy in upcoming Disney Plus content. A straight-up space western might be just what we need in a galaxy far, far away. The Mandalorian's Frog Lady may not have a meta backstory within the Star Wars universe, but her struggle speaks volumes about the state of the galaxy, following the savage rule of the Empire. Frog Lady is on a simple mission to deliver her eggs back to the moon, Trask, because this clutch of eggs is the last of her life cycle. She's desperate to keep the eggs safe from harm. No pressure, and no help from Grogu, who seemingly never met a creature he didn't want to eat. Frog Lady provides us with a deeply personal look at the state of civilization throughout the galaxy. Much of the Star Wars franchise focuses on massive battles without shining much light on the aftermath of that destruction. How many other species are almost completely wiped out after the Empire's destruction? Not all species eliminations come from the massive blast of a Death Star, and Frog Lady shows us how deep and vast the herd following war can be for the beings caught in its wake. It's not often that a Jedi leaves the Order, but then again, Ahsoka Tano is no ordinary Force wielder. Ahsoka first appeared during the 2008 animated film Clone Wars, which spawned a TV series of the same name. While Ahsoka's final scene in the Clone Wars series finale leaves her journey open-ended, viewers do know Anakin Skywalker's former Padawan has left her role as a Jedi completely behind. Yet as we see in The Mandalorian, she doesn't abandon the Force. Rosario Dawson assumed the role of Ahsoka for The Mandalorian for the show's 13th episode, The Jedi, and when she appears for the first time, Ahsoka wields a pair of white lightsabers which she purified from dark side crystals. Canon projects like Clone Wars, comic books, and novels have introduced fans to numerous Force wielders and their lightsabers, but Ahsoka is a Force-sensitive character who's actively wielding the Force while rejecting the Jedi way. Her choice to follow her own rules leaves room for fascinating storylines and characters that don't jibe with Jedi beliefs. The former Jedi left her mark on The Mandalorian by shedding light on the life of the child when she revealed his true name and his past as a Padawan at the Jedi Academy. That was just the beginning. Rosario Dawson's Ahsoka is getting her very own self-titled show on Disney+. Valen Hess may be a new character for The Mandalorian, but what he represents goes far beyond his character's scope. Star Wars has a significant number of villains, but most of them are pretty one-dimensional. We all hate Grand Moff Tarkin, the ruthless Imperial naval leader, but beyond a few scenes where he demonstrates his cunning nature or talks about military tactics, we don't get a sense of who he is. We often don't know why characters who represent the Empire do the things they do, outside of fear and the lust for power. So it's interesting to hear from some lower-level villains. In Chapter 15, The Believer, Mando has to sneak into an Imperial base with former Imperial sharpshooter Miggs Mayfield. And before the pair can sneak back out, they're cornered by Hess, who was once Mayfield's superior officer. When Mayfield asks Hess how he could sacrifice his entire division to wipe out a city, Hess replies,
"See, boys, everybody thinks they want freedom, but what they really want is order."
Hess toasts the Empire, at which point Mayfield shoots him dead. But before that, Hess's monologue offers a rare glimpse into the mindset of the Empire's military commanders. And it's chilling, even though his answer doesn't come as a surprise. Given that The Mandalorian focuses on characters who have reasons for avoiding the New Republic after the fall of the Empire, it's unsurprising that we don't see many former rebels. Pilot Carson Teva and his wingman Trapper Wolf are exceptions. Along with others from the rebel ranks who helped take down the Empire, the pair now monitors goings-on in an official capacity, policing a galaxy healing after decades of strife. Mandalorian viewers are introduced to the duo in Chapter 10, The Passenger, when Mando's attempt to avoid them nearly gets him eaten by a giant space spider. It isn't just that he's feeling shy. After Teva and Wolf rescue him, we find out there's a warrant out for his arrest. When Mando asks Teva if he's going to try and take him into custody, the pilot admits he ought to, but for better or worse, the New Republic is far from the authoritarian regime that the Empire was, and Teva lets him go. This encounter is more than a glimpse at Republic police work in action. The Mandalorian also threw in a fun Easter egg for fans to discover. Longtime Star Wars writer and Mandalorian producer / occasional director Dave Filoni plays Trapper Wolf. And with the upcoming Star Wars Disney Plus series, Rangers of the New Republic, which will take place during the same time as The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, we may see a lot more of these two. We all know Boba Fett is important, but let's be real, he's pretty tame in the original trilogy. He stumbles over his armor, he barely says a word, and he's accidentally bested by a blind Han Solo. As far as villains go, Star Wars has done better. But is he really a villain? The original trilogy made it clear that he was only in it for the money. However, given his urge to help Mando and the warrior's code of ethics he shows in The Mandalorian, it's hard not to wonder if the Empire forced his hand. Following his surprise return and subsequent role in rescuing Grogu from Moff Gideon, Boba Fett's slate is now clean, and he returns to Tatooine to take over Jabba the Hutt's palace. We've yet to learn what the former bounty hunter has been up to all these years. Was he stuck in the digestive tract of a Sarlacc for several years, or did he escape relatively quickly after Han launched him into the pit? Perhaps his motives aren't as pure as they might seem. He does save Fennec Shand, noting that they were both left for dead in the desert. Maybe he was once the villain everyone believed him to be, but he's clearly been changed. Then again, the teaser for this Disney Plus series, The Book of Boba Fett, suggests otherwise. He's a little too smug when he kills Bib Fortuna and claims his throne. What does it take to stop assassin Fennec Shand from killing people for money? A near-death experience, apparently. But better a change of heart later than never, if Fennec Shand has actually changed her tune. We briefly learn about the assassin in Season 1 of The Mandalorian, and we discover that she's a mercenary who's already killed for the Hutts. It's not until Season 2 that her character is more thoroughly fleshed out. Fittingly, given that Shand is named after the desert-dwelling Fennec Fox, the assassin is sly and her motives are often unclear. While Shand isn't exactly a hero, she does have some kind of code. The mercenary follows Boba Fett after he saves her from death, and she even puts her life on the line to help Mando find Grogu when Moff Gideon's dark troopers kidnap him. Both she and Boba Fett are incredibly hard to read, but hopefully, the Book of Boba Fett will answer all of our burning questions. Star Wars fans who haven't tuned in to the animated series Clone Wars and Rebels might not be able to guess by her appearance in The Mandalorian, but Bo-Katan Kryze is kind of a big deal on Mandalore. Bo-Katan is devoted to returning Mandalore to its former glory, and she's taken on the likes of Darth Maul to prove it. By the time we see her in The Mandalorian, Bo-Katan is in pursuit of the Darksaber, which is being wielded by Moff Gideon. It's a quest that grows more complicated after Mando becomes its rightful owner by defeating Gideon in combat during the season finale. Din tries to give her the weapon, but as a delighted Gideon points out, the Darksaber must be won, not given. It's unclear at the close of Season 2 just how much Mando's ownership of the Darksaber will mean for Mandalore and Bo-Katan. But any conflict between the two won't be the first time they've clashed. When they meet, she scoffs at Mando's refusal to take off his helmet, basically accusing him of following a cult-like faction of Mandalorian tradition. Being faced with Bo-Katan's assertion that you can be a Mandalorian without shielding your face from the galaxy marks the first time Mando really questions his staunch beliefs. The question lingers as we see him remove his helmet twice after that conversation, particularly in the poignant closing moments of the season finale, when he removes it in order to give Grogu a proper goodbye. Disney billed The Rise of Skywalker as the swan song to the Skywalker saga. Rey even buries Luke and Leia's lightsabers, putting their storyline to rest. It wasn't subtle. Yet The Mandalorian's second season finale brought us a re-emergence of the Skywalkers in a major way. Luke himself saunters onto Moff Gideon's ship, decimating an entire platoon of Dark Troopers in his response to Grogu's call. It's clear from the minute a hooded figure brandishes a green lightsaber that Luke is under the Shroud of Mystery, but many fans were still thrilled to see him remove his hood, looking and sounding just like he did in Return of the Jedi. While the moment is one of triumph, it also poses the question, just how far will this go? Will Disney be whipping out CGI Luke in another 30 years? If Luke is fair game, then who else are they going to CGI back into existence? With a slew of Disney Plus shows on the horizon, including Obi-Wan Kenobi and Lando, it's hard not to wonder whether the Skywalker era will ever be over. And while for nostalgia's sake that's a great comfort, it also might prevent other great stories from emerging. The bottom line, Disney may have been skewing the truth when they said The Rise of Skywalker was the end of the Skywalker story. But fans still have to admit the scene was still pretty epic.
Din Djarin, the Mandalorian's titular bounty hunter, has had a wild ride since he crossed paths with the child, also known as Grogu. Luckily, Djarin has a variety of weapons to protect himself and his little companion. Let's take a look at some of Djarin's gear, but be warned, spoilers are ahead. Mandalorian helmets have long been associated with the Star Wars creed, and Djarin's helmet is no exception. Just like with any other Mandalorian helmet, Djarin's features a T-shaped visor and entirely conceals his face. Also, Djarin's tribe follows the way of the Mandalore, a religion where members are not allowed to remove their helmets in public. If they do, they can never put them back on again. Why, you ask?
This is the way. This is the way.
Djarin has been seen without his helmet in public only twice so far. In Chapter 8 Redemption, because he was badly injured and needed a droid to tend to his wounds, and in Chapter 15 The Believer to bypass an Imperial security scan. Mando's helmet also comes with a variety of features, such as tracking heat signatures, long-range audio, and detecting recent footsteps left on the ground. These perks are especially useful when Djarin needs to locate nearby individuals, whether they be enemies or those in need of assistance. Djarin's Mandalorian armor not only looks cool, but it is also extremely durable. It's made out of a powerful metal alloy called Beskar, which is known to withstand blaster fire and even the might of a lightsaber. Since Djarin's armor is badly damaged in the show's sophomore episode, he brings a large payment of Beskar to his tribe's armorer, who uses it to craft a new cuirass. Instead of having a red and gray color scheme in the vein of his previous armor, this shiny new armor is metallic silver, just like his helmet. In Redemption, the armorer announces the formation of Djarin's clan, Clan Mudhorn, which is made up of himself and the child. To coincide with this formation, the armorer inscribes the skull of the Mudhorn on his right pauldron as his signet. Djarin's dual flamethrowers have come in handy time and time again. For instance, in Chapter 3, The Sin, Djarin uses a flamethrower to torch an attacking stormtrooper. He's even been known to bring the heat when words fail him.
You understand this?
Like any weapon in Star Wars, however, flamethrowers have their limits. After Djarin is surrounded by bounty hunters who all want the child, he uses a flamethrower to drive them away, but it runs out of juice when he needs it most. While Boba Fett first used a variation of this weapon in the animated segment from the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special, the Ambient Phase Pulse Blaster in The Mandalorian seems to be much more powerful. Throughout the course of the series, Djarin uses this sniper rifle to either incapacitate or disintegrate anyone who stands in his path. These enemies can be big as a Trandoshan or as small as a Jawa, both of whom were killed in the same episode. Djarin also uses the blaster to tase a wide variety of intergalactic enemies and creatures such as stormtroopers and even a crate dragon. When Djarin returns to the Mandalorian hideout with his Beskar payment, the armorer uses the excess material to build him a special weapon, whistling birds. These small guided munitions are placed in his left vambrace. When deployed, the projectiles fly through the air while making a whistling sound before striking their targets and detonating a small explosive. The armorer tells Djarin that these projectiles are rare, so he saves them for desperate moments. Star Wars fans have often associated jetpacks with Mandalorian culture, yet Djarin didn't receive his own until the final episode of Season 1. In Redemption, the armorer asks Mando if he has ever trained in the Rising Phoenix, to which he promptly responds that he did when he was a boy. The armorer then gives Mando a jetpack and sends him on his way to reunite the child with its own kind. The jetpack comes in handy later in the episode when Djarin uses it to attack a TIE fighter that's piloted by Moff Gideon. Djarin also uses the jetpack in the subsequent episode when he flies out of the belly of an angry crate dragon. However, despite all of its advantages in warfare, the best part about the jetpack is watching the child's ears flop around when Mando takes him for a ride. Flash charges aren't exactly commonplace in the Star Wars universe, but for Djarin, they are especially useful in Chapter 5, The Gunslinger. This episode sees Mando working with aspiring bounty hunter Toro Calican to capture a wanted assassin named Fennec Shand. They soon discover that Shand is using a faraway ridge as a makeshift sniper nest. After nightfall, Djarin and Calican use flash charges to blind Shand so they can apprehend her. Before long, Calican decides to betray Mando. Djarin blinds Calican with a flash charge and takes him out. It's not a big loss for the galaxy, though. In fact, Mato could probably sum up Calican in 2 words.
Womp rat.
Djarin's whipcord has helped him get out of many deadly situations. In Chapter 6, The Prisoner, for example, Djarin takes on several New Republic security droids. Throughout the fight, Mando uses the grappling hook to behead one droid and uses it again to bring another one closer to a droid that's being incinerated. Djarin later finds himself locked in a jail cell. Luckily, he escapes after he uses his whipcord to tether a security droid near his cell door. He then rips off one of its arms, which he uses to open the lock. Grenades are probably one of the most important weapons for Djarin. In fact, we've seen him reach for them in wildly different circumstances. One instance where they were especially useful happens in Chapter 11, The Heiress, when Djarin, Bo-Katan Kryze, and 2 other Mandalorians infiltrate an Imperial cruiser transporting valuable weapons. After flying to the ship, the 4 warriors try to take the ship's bridge, but end up encountering a squad of stormtroopers armed with heavy repeating blasters, all while the captain is attempting to crash the ship at the behest of Moff Gideon. Djarin quickly devises a plan to get himself and the others to the bridge. He asks the 3 Mandalorians to cover him as he charges toward the remaining stormtroopers. After getting close enough, Djarin throws 2 grenades at the enemies, blowing them up and creating a path to victory. When speaking of self-preservation, a wise man once said,
"Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side."
Even though Djarin knows next to nothing about the so-called hokey religion, he almost always has a blaster at his side. As he demonstrates many times throughout the show, Djarin is very proficient with his blaster pistol. In fact, the initial fight scene that kicks off the entire series features Mando using his pistol to shoot the control panel of a door, which then slices a Quarren trawler in half. And that's just the first of many memorable scenes of Djarin relying on his pistol to save the day and the child.